He was the divine demon, a monster so powerful his sword was said to split the heavens themselves. The entire martial world feared his name until the day he finally died. But instead of disappearing, he reincarnates in the body of a sickly guy from a fallen family. Now the strongest martial artist in history is trapped inside a weak body, slowly losing its mind. Surrounded by enemies, mocked by everyone, and haunted by madness itself, he must rise once again from the bottom. One day, a massive bloodbath occurred. The protagonist stood among the slaughtered, blood-drenched people. He found himself facing his remaining 3 opponents and abruptly drew his sword from its sheath. Namgung exclaimed, "This freak is clearly exhausted now." He is the head of the Namgung clan. Beside him stood the abbot of the Shaolin Monastery, Gin, and the leader of the Huaguang Mountain sect. Namgung shouted that they must kill him right now. Qian exclaimed that now only they remained. He glared at them menacingly and raised a wind. At that moment, Gin tensed up and exclaimed, "A spell that means endless life or endless light," which is why Buddhists often use it as a greeting, wishing each other longevity and radiance. He shouted for everyone to prepare and came face to face with the protagonist. He struck him with incredible force, causing Jin to fall to the ground and scream, "May he be damned, divine demon." He used his great Buddha palm and directed a bright magical light towards Qian. Qian had expected such a bright flash and easily dodged the attack. Gin was surprised and asked, "What?" Qian exclaimed that they would kill him first, and at that moment their powers clashed. Gin shouted at the other two, "What are they even doing? They should attack him now." After these words, Namgung and Guan moved to help, and using their magical powers, began to surround the protagonist and Jin, but nothing worked. They combined a flash the color of happy lightning and shouted for him to die, even managing to hit Cheon. Blood spurted from Cheon's mouth, but he did not stop fighting. Jin pulled out his hand and shouted, "May he be reborn in heaven." At that moment, he pounced on his opponent, when Cheon suddenly rose into the air, greatly surprising Jin. Dark magical powers began to emanate from him, and a moment later, he destroyed his first opponent and slammed him into the ground. He then smiled and said that the next one would come soon, as Gin had died. The remaining Namgung and Guan realized he was nothing but a monster. Qian kicked off and abruptly ran toward them. Guan was in front, and Namgung told him to step aside, but it was no use, and Qian pounced on him with incredible speed. The divine demon Cheon, to kill him, drowning him in the blood of the Central Plain. The elites of all 9 great schools of the Orthodox Alliance had gathered here. However, confronted by the summoned power of the greatest under heaven, the Alliance was on the brink of destruction. Cheon shouted to the old man, "Has he already chosen a place for his grave?" He replied, "Of course, the place is already prepared. His grave will be right here." He used the endless rain of plum petals, everything around him glowing with bright pink magic, and the tree roots began to approach Cheon, who looked and realized he had to hold on a little longer. He remembered the old days when he was happy with his loved ones, and he couldn't die yet. Cheon used the demonic dragon martial art, the 5th technique, Black Dragon Evil Slayer. He struck with such speed that Guan died instantly. After that, only one opponent remained, and that was Namgu. Cheon was aimed at him when he used the King's Blind Obstacle Strike, and everything around him glowed with his blue magic. Qian knew it really hurt, but he only felt a slight tickle. The freak, the image of his murdered family was in his eyes, and he was so angry that he didn't care about the pain, and he pounced on his opponent, who looked at him in surprise, not expecting such a reaction. Qian swung his sword and struck Namgung with incredible force, causing his blood to spurt out and leaving him stunned. After that, Qian threw him aside a few more times and thought, "Cheon, he's a vile ophthalmologist for a demonic sect." At that moment, he struck him with one last magical beam, but Qian was able to easily avoid it, despite struggling to catch his breath for a long time. Namgung cried out for him to finally die and stabbed him in the back, because his worthless life would end here and now. Qian gritted his teeth in anger and pain and realized that the picture was slowly becoming clear. Yes, he was proposing to end everything here and now. Namgung asked again, "What?" Qian turned around and shouted that he had said they would end here and now. Blood spurted from his mouth, and he screamed, "This damned fate will not end." He stabbed the sword through himself, straight into Namgung, who was stunned by the pain and began coughing. Qian finally pulled the sword from his chest, and Namgung couldn't understand how this could have happened. It was his heart, so how had he defeated it? Had he really surpassed human limits? That was what he was, a divine demon. At that moment, Namgung died, and the dark magical powers began to dissolve into thin air. The 9 great schools were wiped off the face of the earth. Qian asked, would that be enough? He recalled his past, when children fought in the garden and shouted that they were arrogant brats. What did they even believe in, continuing to behave so impudently? Qian fought and injured his acquaintances. His teacher raised him and asked. He gave them a good beating. His life flashed before his eyes. It was a long time ago. How strange it was to see his mentor's young face again. Yes, his path in the world of martial arts began right here. Initially, he simply tried to survive every day, but then he had to wander the world, relying entirely on his sword. To survive today, he had to kill someone, and so the endless cycle of meaningless deaths continued. Is there even any meaning to such a life? Is life really that fleeting? The girl told him she understood how he felt. She too argued with people in the marketplace every day, and if he didn't see everyone as his enemy in this place, he wouldn't last long here, and calming her younger brother and sister every time they begged for special side dishes was no easy task either. But in moments like these, they looked incredibly sweet. When her parents passed away and she gave up, they gave her the strength to live, so she could start a new life. She asked why he couldn't find the same meaning for himself, to find the will to live. He screamed because he wanted to live with them, but they became the reason for life, for someone who knew nothing in this world except killing. He raised his sword again for action, and this wandering life without a home began again. What was the meaning of his life? He recalled the facial features of that very girl, and tears welled up in his eyes. He began to cry and realized they had already been here. The path of slaughter he had walked alone for 15 years. Despite his sword becoming dull and countless wounds appearing on his body, he finally reached the full force of his power and carried out his vengeance. Finally, looking at the rising sun, he lowered his sword. The divine demon Cheon had fallen into eternal sleep in this place. When he closed his eyes, he heard screams. Did he show up here without any warning and talk all sorts of nonsense? Did he really think he would sell him his martial arts for a handful of coins? Cheon became enraged by the noise and asked, after all he had been through, was he really being cast into hell? The girl standing across from him was explaining that his older brother had an accident and wouldn't be able to inherit the clan's martial heritage. So how about passing on the family's martial arts to her son? He didn't understand what was happening and looked ahead questioningly. What was this even like? This clearly wasn't hell. The child began screaming that this was unacceptable, since his older brother was alive and well, as their family's martial arts could be passed down to a collateral branch on his mother's side. They weren't even close relatives. Even if the brother couldn't inherit the family's martial arts, their grandfather's techniques belonged to the family. Cheon looked at the children in surprise and asked, "Who are these two anyway?" At that moment, a young man approached them and suggested that this matter wouldn't be easily resolved, and that he would make a proposal. Cheon asked again, "Proposal?" He replied that he had heard that the Yeomwa family was in such dire straits that he had difficulty feeding even these two children, so he would bet money, and his stake would be the family's heritage. Then they'll fight, and the winner will take all. What does he think about this? And his little brother started shouting, "What is he talking about?" Because of his madness, their older brother couldn't even start training. Does he really think they'll fall for such an obvious trick? The boy chuckled and said they were talking too much, when Cheon suddenly asked in surprise, "Who is this Munjin?" His brother and sister were dumbfounded, and Cheon announced that he was the divine demon Cheon. At that moment, there was an awkwardness between them, and no one understood what was happening. At that moment, his interlocutor asked again, "What? Who is he?" Cheon replied that he was dubbed a divine demon. He asked again, "A divine demon? This is no longer funny. Why doesn't he go further and call himself the Lord of the Underworld? This guy is the second son of the Blue Flower Trading Guild, Dobo." The children also didn't understand why he said something like that right now. His sister was also angry, and at that moment, people assumed that his mania was getting worse day by day. With such a family heir, the fate of the Yoma clan was already sealed. She says these words out of her family affection for them. Let them not judge harshly, and there is nothing wrong with the proposal. This girl is the head of the Blue Flower Trading Guild, Bu Cheoen. Bu clapped her hands and said there was no point in talking anymore. She would consider their silence as an agreement to a duel. They should meet on the 5th day of next month at the Flying Shadow Pavilion. Dobo added that they would make a promise to each other, as one warrior to another. If he breaks his word, he knows what will happen, right? And they went ahead and decided everything themselves. And his sister asked again, what should they do now? He'd never really held a sword. Cheon asked again, are they talking about him now? The guys looked at him in bewilderment, and he replied that nothing funnier could be imagined. If he gathered all his energy into a fist, he could, but suddenly he realized that nothing was working and asked again, what? Where did all his energy go? What was this? He had no internal energy at all. He started screaming and got angry. What was wrong with his weak body? His bones were so fragile. Were these hands even capable of holding a sword? His sister started crying and begging him to stop. She begged her brother to come to his senses, even if his mind was paralyzed by madness. After what these people said, only the last idiot or a complete fool would just sit idly by. And her brother asked again, the last idiot or a complete fool? How could she say such offensive things to their older brother? She should apologize to him right now. She started sobbing and replied that she wouldn't do it because it was because of him that their parents died. Cheon was dumbfounded as he tried to figure out what was going on, and his sister ran away from the scene. His brother turned to him and said that, although he didn't remember, this happens often, so please let him be understanding. Let him forgive, but he will leave first. Cheon realized that the children treated him like a madman and that it was all very strange. Sometime later, evening came, and he clearly remembered beheading the head of the Namgun clan. And because his heart was pierced through, it was unbearable pain for him to even take a single breath. He had avenged his family and his younger brother and sister, so he should have calmly closed his eyes and retired. But why did he end up in this body? What even happened? And who are these kids who look exactly like Seokjun and Yeju? No, first of all, why do they consider him crazy? What kind of nonsense is this? At that moment, a familiar face ran up to him and shouted, Young master, did he leave the residence again when he was so unwell? Does he even know how worried he was about him? Cheon asked again. Who else was he? He saw that he knew him. The boy was surprised and asked again. What? It seemed he had been overcome by a wave of madness again, and he was therefore accepting an explanation. This was Masok, a servant of the Yeomwa clan. Once, thanks to their exceptional talent for wisdom, countless sectors of the Orthodox Alliance desired to take him as their disciple. He is the heir of the Yeomwa clan, Moonjin, who turned 23 this year. He is his young master. He has told him this for the 6,205th time. Cheon asked in surprise, really? Then if he was so talented, then why is his inner core in such a state now? And as for the words about mania, why does everyone treat him like a madman? Masok didn't know what to say. It happened 17 years ago. They decided to have a fair fight without internal energy, and Moonjin, at 6, asked 9-year-old Dobo for a duel. Dobo replied, okay, a fair fight without internal energy. It was unknown who had first requested the duel, but the two young gentlemen engaged in combat without their elders present. They fought with all their might. As expected from Dobo, he deflected every blow. As expected from a talent who thirsted for everything, the Orthodox Alliance sector expected a fair fight without the use of internal energy. Then, surprised, he asked again, what did he just say? Dobo replied that he was an idiot and lunged at him with a fist. Moonjin was incredibly frightened and was thrown far away. When he landed, he asked, Dobo, they had agreed to use internal energy, so why did he use the Fist of 7 Wounds? He replied that even in this situation, Moonjin still called him brother. As he'd already noticed, he used the 7 Sex Gongdong Fist, and they say one blow like that is enough to leave serious consequences. He's been testing this technique lately, and last week, he tried it on a senior disciple. He's still on the brink of death. Moonjin, I wonder what will happen to him. After these words, he struck the kid again. Cheon realized it was all clear. That was why he was being treated like a madman. If this state was one of the consequences of the blow near the Seiren, then it made perfect sense. But more importantly, he damaged his core of internal energy, turned him into a madman, and now he was so shamelessly challenging him to a duel. Then how did they deal with that freak that had him so wild now? Masok replied that it was the late head of the family's decision. He asked again, the father of this body? Masok replied fearfully, yes. Besides being the late family head's nephew, young Master Dobo was also the heir to the Blue Flower Trading Guild and one of the 10 outstanding talents in the Central Plains. So the late family head only scolded him more severely, and that settled the matter. His own son had been attacked with fists, 7 people had brought him to this state, and he'd simply scolded the offender? What a pathetic family. And where are his parents now? Masok lowered his gaze and replied, his parents, but he didn't finish the sentence, and they entered the room. When Cheon walked to the mirror, Masok explained that his obsession had only worsened over time. The clan head had run up serious debts, desperately trying to cure him. 9 years ago, the mistress's illness worsened and she died. And 3 years ago, the debt-ridden clan head also died. Ultimately, he was left alone with his brother and sister. He couldn't even properly raise one son, and that's why he suffered. A cursed child who brought his parents to their graves. Now only his younger brother and sister will suffer. And so the glory of the Yeomwa clan has faded. All that remains are debts incurred in the hopes of curing him, 2 loyal servants, and a dozen warriors under his command. And also, the young master of the Yeomwa clan, Dojin, and the young mistress of the Yeomwa clan, Soen, his younger brother and sister. The family was destroyed by a single illness, so it's no wonder that child lashed out at him. Sometime later, night fell, and Cheon reflected on what he had learned from the history books in Moonjin's room. When he was a divine demon, life had indeed left his body after the battle with the 9 great schools, and it seemed 30 years had passed since then. The sensation of this world is too vivid to call it a dream, so it seems truly real. Simply put, he's a madman without even a drop of internal energy, possessing the body of the eldest son of the Yeomwa Moonjin clan. In any case, all those he was supposed to kill are dead, and he has no regrets left in his life. But his younger brother and sister, their story is tragic, as the memories he saw further prove. After all, he'll now have to live in this body. Maybe he should help them a little? But there's a major catch. The Blue Flower Guild is the cause of all this destruction. The one who crippled this body was there, and the first thing he needs to prepare for is a duel with Dobo, which will take place on the 5th day of next month. Before then, he needs to embark on the path of a disciple at all costs. He smiled and wondered, does that mean he'll have to start from the most basic principles? He sat down in the lotus position opposite the window, thinking that it reminded him of when he first began studying martial arts as a child, when he'd even found it hard to breathe. He inhaled and saw a bright glow, wondering if perhaps this body's natural talent was truly special. He didn't even have to try to sense the chi in the air. Multiple bright rays appeared around his body. Cheon simply closed his eyes, and a bright light began to emanate from him, piercing even the walls of his house. After a while, those in the house heard a loud scream. They didn't understand where it was coming from, and ran into the room, asking, "What's wrong, young Master Moonjin?" He fell motionless to the floor, and the man screamed that young Master Moonjin had finally died. No, the brat was perfectly fine, except his pulse was faster than usual. Maesok clutched his head in hope and exhaled with relief. Wangbong grabbed his hands and asked why his body had become healthier. Moonjin raised his head and asked, "What's What's wrong with this body, you old idiots? Just trying to form a core of profound energy had turned into such excruciating pain. And he asked again, what did he just say? Munjin screamed and asked, why does this whole thing have such a shitty constitution? Guangbong replied that if he was talking about his body's constitution, he'd heard a monk call it a heavenly martial constitution. Cheon was surprised by this name, and Huangbong said, yes, it was also said that his body was blessed by heaven to walk the right path. Cheon asked again, is he laughing now? At that moment, he began coughing up blood and realized that this constitution was completely incompatible with demonic martial arts. If a person with such a body tried to cultivate demonic martial arts, the pain would be excruciating and everything would end in death. There was a heavenly constitution of feelings and a heavenly constitution of murder, as well as a heavenly constitution of flames and even a heavenly constitution of longevity. At that moment, Munjin fell again, and Masok shouted at him not to lose consciousness, waving his arms. Cheon didn't understand why. Of all the listed constitutions, he had been given this one. It was simply a curse, because in theory it would happen next month, and everything was really very bad. He asked in a trembling voice, who were those old men? Masok replied that they were the chief rulers of the Yeomwa clan, Bakmin and Huangbong. Cheon thought, the heir of the clan is on the verge of death, and they have such expressions on their faces. Huangbong said that the young master's condition seemed to be worsening every day, and he thought they should prepare their hearts for the worst. Cheon reached out to him, his trembling hand angered by his words. They shouted at him not to move anymore, but Cheon decided to fight, because he didn't want to die at all. After a while, it started raining, and Masok, who had met Cheon, shouted, young master, he's been lying in his room for 3 days straight. Wait, is he sure he's okay? Cheon thought about how he'd been bedridden for 3 days, and that with this damned body, he'd die before the day of the duel arrived. He told him to turn down the volume, saying that he was making him look bad, and more importantly, if he was going to the duel, he'd need a sword. He should bring him some swords now. Masok looked at him in bewilderment, then said that they were currently in such a situation that they might not have anything to eat tomorrow. So where would they get the extra coins to buy a sword? Cheon asked irritably. Is there really no money left in this damned house? Masok replied yes. They were currently having to borrow money from the money-lending house of occultists, Chain and Tiger Claws. Because of their incredibly high interest rates, their debts had become enormous. Cheon thought that this was truly a fallen family. It seemed like he would have to solve his financial problems first, right? He asked again. I see. In that case, asking for a little more debt would really be a big deal? Masok was surprised and asked, what did he mean? Wait, was he going to borrow more money? Was he seriously talking about this now? Cheon ordered him to stop wasting his time and go and send a message to those old men. He should also write that he was going for a walk. While a thunderstorm raged outside, Huangbong saw the letter and started shouting. Was he really saying that young Master Munjin had gone off in Tiger Claws again? Okay, he thought that wouldn't be a problem. They'd just send him on his way, right? Bakman replied that he thought the problem lay elsewhere. If young Master continued to be an eyesore in Tiger Claws, the assassination squad would take action. After some time, they arrived at Tiger Claws, a money-lending house. Munjin grinned and said, thugs, tell your boss that Munjin from the Yeomwa clan wishes to see him. Tiger Claws guard Noho said, if he comes here to gamble again, he should stop talking nonsense, play quietly, and get out of here. Cheon asked again, what? He can't convey his words. Then let him call his boss. Noho asked him what he just said. Masok replied in a trembling voice that he didn't mean that at all, that his young master was simply ill. Cheon asked him again why he was staring. Noho decided to fight him, and Cheon asked what was wrong. He told his brother that this jerk wanted to see the head of the company. The deputy head asked again, was he here or something? The manager? He wanted to meet with the head? But why? Cheon replied that he was going to borrow some more money from him. The guy said so he was their client. He was the deputy head of the Tenacious Tiger cohorts named Junbo. If it was about borrowing money, he didn't need to meet with the head. He should go inside. Cheon and Masok followed inside, and a crowd of guards escorted them. Masok told the young master to please come to his senses and go home, because he didn't like this whole idea. Cheon replies that they've already come so far, so why does he keep asking him to come back? Masok replied that a few days ago, the tea house owner, Madam, saw one of the leaders of Tenacious Tiger Claws get into a fight with a scoundrel, and in the blink of an eye, he sat on his chest, beating him on the spot. He heard that he was an incredibly skilled martial artist who had mastered the double-killing technique, Great Heaven Killing the Moon. He asked again, what did he say? Double killing what? He replied, double killing technique, Great Heaven Killing the Moon. Cheon asked again, so what? What did he think he should do? At that moment, one of the opponents said he saw that his servant had quickly figured out what was going on. But what could he do? It was too late for him to go back. Cheon tensed at that moment, and one of them raised his fist, signaling that they could begin the fight. Cheon asked again, so he had planned to do this from the very beginning? He replied that there was no way he could have killed the eldest son of the Yeomwa clan at the main entrance, where a crowd of people had gathered. He couldn't even pay off the interest, let alone pay off the principal. Yet he dared to show up here so brazenly. He won't let him pick their pockets like his parents did. At that moment, Masok began to bow at their feet and shout, please forgive them. and he begged for his young master's life. Cheon asked again, what, like his parents? He never had parents. A moment of confusion arose between them, and he realized it was a curse, as for a moment he felt like his former self. His rival replied that he was starting. Junbo offered to beat him lightly. The knights abruptly drew their swords and shouted that they would carry out his orders, then grabbed Cheon by the clothes and yelled at him to die. The insolent freak. Masok cried out in fear, but at that moment, Cheon broke his bone, and he cried out in pain. He screamed. What kind of trick did he use? Cheon replied that for such a large body, his bones were too fragile. With such a body, he should take advantage of this moment rather than attack head-on. Then he asked why they were all frozen in place. They had to finish him off quickly. The guys pounced on Cheon, who tried to deftly avoid their attacks, and one of the attackers shouted that he was a slippery snake. Cheon thought that since the rapid stepping technique wouldn't work here, it was the best choice for attack. So he gritted his teeth in anger and punched his opponent, who fell in a pool of his own blood. They cried out that he was a bastard and pounced on him again, who managed to jump into the air and, after a few deft moves, attack his opponent. He asked, "What's going on?" When he delivered the finishing blow, he flew to the side, and the remaining guys tried to rise from their knees. Masok asked in surprise, "Is he alright, young master?" Cheon asked again, "Can't he see?" He was actually more alive than anyone else. Masok exclaimed, "What the hell was that? And where did he learn martial arts?" He replied that it wasn't martial arts, but simply that his body had learned to react naturally after many years of living on the street. He asked again, "What? But young master, when did he even have time to live on the street? He has plenty of experience, but let him try to avoid it." At that moment, Cheon pounced on Junbo and used a bright beam of light. He asked again, "What, that coin?" Junbo told the pathetic warriors to get out of sight, and he would deal with him himself. Cheon replied that he simply wanted to speak with their leader. Was that really such a difficult request? Junbo replied that the leader wasn't someone you could just meet with, so let him bid farewell to his life. After these words, he lunged at Cheon with his sword, and moments later, a bright flash of light erupted between them. Cheon managed to block this attack with his chopsticks, which surprised Cheon. Cheon thought he brought them as a substitute because he didn't have swords right now, and they were very useful. A flash of light erupted between them, and he realized that, as expected, they were using martial arts he'd never heard of. When he clenched his hand into a fist, he realized his opponent had opened up and struck him in the arm. He cried out in pain as a huge stream of blood began to seep from his vein, and he thought that not only had he blocked him with chopsticks, but he was also using them to attack. He was a terrible person, and at that moment, Jimbo threw his hand aside and began cursing. Cheon said that if he continued to underestimate chopsticks, he would soon bleed. With these words, he pounced on his opponent and dealt several blows. Jimbo couldn't understand. Wasn't he a madman without a single drop of internal energy? How had he suddenly achieved such a profound mastery of weapons? Was this really Munjin from the Yeomwa clan whom he knew? Cheon said he'd heard their family was deeply in debt, so he was a little curious about their kind. But he, with such superficial abilities, dared to brazenly extort money from them? Junbo was startled when Cheon brought the tip of his sword to him and approached. He replied that in that case, let him show him a taste of the martial arts he had looked down on. Junbo asked again, "What? When did he ever do that?" He exclaimed, "Enough jokes," and used the double killing technique, Great Heaven Moon Slaying. Cheon realized that those who had slapped him might be joking around, and at that moment, Junbo himself fell under attack. Cheon pounced on him with his fists, and Junbo couldn't understand how he'd concealed such strength until now. When Cheon punched him, Junbo exclaimed in a trembling voice, "How will he cope with the consequences?" Cheon replied that he hadn't come here to listen to threats, and if he says what he wants to hear, he might live a little longer, so he'll repeat his request once again. Will he lend him some more money? After a while, Cheon looked up and realized he hadn't had this much fun in a long time. Masok shouted, "Young sir, with such fragile health, smoking tobacco is bad for him." Cheon muttered, "What a waste." When they sat down to talk, he asked what exactly they were interested in. He replied that, basically, he wanted to know why they, the idiots who never work at a loss, had suddenly started supporting the Yeomwa clan so zealously and without any collateral. There was clearly some malicious intent at work here. The man replied that he was mistaken, young master. What kind of malicious intent could there even be? Cheon asked again. Seriously? He could hear the gears turning in his head even from here. Let him think about this carefully. If he shoved more than 12 dice down his throat, he wouldn't be able to say anything, no matter how much he wanted to. When the lantern lit up, the man said the order came from the Blue Flower Guild. Cheon asked again, "Really?" He had a feeling those rats were involved, so how did they make a deal with them? The guy didn't know what to say, and Cheon said he was some kind of enlightened warrior. If he was going to be loyal to someone, he should be loyal to his subordinates, even if his body was hacked to pieces. And this place burned to the ground today. Those degenerates wouldn't even bat an eyelid. The guy was dumbfounded, and then his face suddenly glared with anger, expecting them to sign a contract. The Blue Flower Guild told them to borrow as much money from the Manhwa clan as they wanted at the highest possible interest rate. They asked to put their family in such a dire situation as if they were in debt to the King of Hell himself. If they did everything as they said, after the Manhwa clan's fall, they were promised a decent compensation and the return of their land holdings. The protagonist asked again, so he did take the clan's land as collateral, right? Then he owes 300 ning of gold, which he takes today. How much will that be in a year? He replied that according to the contract it was approximately 5,000 gold. Cheon chuckled and asked again, what are they? Clowns who know how to make people laugh. Well, okay, now they'll move on to another question. Who are they? He asks about the freaks who provide them with protection. The guy said they are part of the unorthodox forces of the Four Heavens, a squad of shadow assassins. The elder asked again, a squad of shadow assassins? Was such an organization part of the Union of Four Heavens? He replied that he heard they joined recently. The Union of Four Heavens is a vile company. And at that moment, Masok whispered in Cheon's ear, young master, is he talking nonsense again? As if he'd ever crossed paths with him? Cheon asked him not to mince words, as he was too lazy to explain. But why hasn't the freak he sent for the money come yet? The guy asked him to wait a little longer. After some time, the guy came running with a chest of money and shouted that there were exactly 300 nyans in it. Cheon was surprised and said that this was just fine and that was enough. He called Masok and said he wasn't leaving. Masok asked again, was he really going to borrow more? Cheon said he should stop flapping his tongue and just take the money. After a while, a heavy rain began to fall and everyone went outside. Cheon asked them not to forget to record this loan in his ledger. As soon as he dealt with their large clients, the Blue Flower Guild, he would come to pay off all their family's debts. And apparently, they were freaks and were also shaking money out of ordinary people, and they should shut down this business. If they crossed the line, he would bury them alive. Junbo replied that he would remember this, then sighed with relief and thought that they would see who would be buried alive first. The crazy young master from the Manhwa clan had really surprised everyone today. Sometime later, Cheon arrived home, and his friends ran up to him and started asking if he was bleeding. He replied that it didn't belong to him. He asked what had happened in the tiger's clutches. He replied that he simply went and borrowed some money because he had heard that life was hard for them, and they also needed to feed the Manhwa clan warriors well. They couldn't allow even those who had remained with them to run away. Masok held the chest with trembling hands, and the elder asked them again, did they steal this money from somewhere? Those moneylenders would never have lent them money. Before leaving, he told them to properly record everything in the ledger, and he, the elder, simply needed to focus on making sure his younger brother and sister had clothes and food. Please, let them try their best. They listened silently to their master, and one of them said, can such madness really exist in the world? Wangbong didn't even know what to answer him and just chuckled. When Cheon entered the room, he lit all the candles and said that he never had parents and therefore wasn't sure what to say. For now, the money issue was more or less resolved, so there was no need to worry too much about everything. From now on, he would take good care of his brother and sister, as well as the rest of the family, so they can rest easy now. In a few days, he had a duel with that freak Dobo, and he would have to fight him because the Manhwa clan's secret martial art was at stake. But they didn't need to worry, because he would break that Guan's neck. The guys watched him from the sidelines and smiled. After a while, a new day dawned, and work was already beginning to boil in the estate. One of the workers threw a wooden box on the ground and shouted, what did he say? Masok noted that everyone had worked hard, and the guy said, stretching out, that the box was so heavy that he felt like his back would break in half. But the main thing is that they brought everything, so now they can have a drink and rest a bit. When Cheon left the room, he shouted that everything had been delivered. 50 jin, 80, and 110. They all arrived so on time. Masok asked again, but what was he going to do with all this? The warriors were sweating profusely while they were carrying them. Cheon opened the box and saw the sword, wondering what he thought one could do with a sword. Of course, one should wield it. He grasped the sword in his hands and thought that first he should start with the easiest one, 50 yen a day. When he tried to lift it, he dropped it right to the ground because of its weight. Masok asked again, was he planning to swing such a heavy thing? Although he had foreseen this, he never expected that he wouldn't be able to lift even the lightest sword. This body was too rotten, but he couldn't give up. His entire body trembled, and he repeated that even if he had to grab it with both hands, he would lift this sword no matter what. And stop looking at him. Let him go and do what he ordered him to do, and let him cook him meat dishes from now on. Masok remained silent, and after a while said that he was simply worried about him. When Cheon began swinging his sword in his room, he realized that he had exactly 2 weeks left until the duel. His current practice was the heavenly martial constitution, and it was completely incompatible with the demonic arts his teacher had taught him. Therefore, his last remaining option was the technique imparted to him by a close friend of his teacher, the 9 swords spell. He swung his sword and used this technique, knowing that now it was his only way to survive. He concentrated and prepared for battle. After some time, Dobo waved his wand and declared it amazing that Munjin had defeated the Tiger Claws gang. His subordinates replied that, according to the reconnaissance squad, they would be unable to move for approximately 2 weeks. He was surprised since Munjin had no core, so how had he managed this? Even with rot, he still retained his value. so now he should prepare a gift for their dear young master, Munjin. He tossed the tool aside and realized he was eagerly awaiting the day of the duel so that he could come here and reveal all his hidden qualities. The protagonist had worked hard and trained diligently. A heavenly martial constitution, if it was a body bestowed by the heavens themselves, it should be able to withstand something of this nature. After some time, Cheon realized that Masok had prepared everything he had asked for. His body trembled, and beads of sweat trickled down his face from exhaustion. He exhaled and realized it was time to begin. He used the 9-sword steel spell, the first tactic being a swift thrust. Raising his sword, he always thrust forward, and no one will dare to block his path. He swung his sword and chanted. The second tactic is the sword of destruction. No matter how he does it, he will destroy everything in his path. He gripped the sword firmly in his hands as he held it, and a stream of water flowed down his face. Tactic 3 is crossing the heavens. Even if it's energy, the heavens are small because there are fewer of them. He was very tired at this point, holding the sword, and cried out that his back really hurt. After that, he decided to move on to the next step and grabbed the whip. Swinging it, he began to undergo the next tests. This was the fourth tactic, the sword of cleaving the void. No martial art can withstand this sword. Even complex techniques can ultimately be defeated by the simplest sword. He realized that none of them had hit and suddenly exclaimed. When he managed to smash several fragments, he used the fifth technique, Sword Killer. Even if there were crowds of enemies before him, they would all kneel before this sword. He shattered several logs and realized that despite their overwhelming numbers, ants could never surpass an elephant. So numbers meant nothing in the face of true strength. He dragged the sword behind him, and suddenly a log fell on his head. He cried out in pain and grew angry, then moved on to the next step. This was the sixth technique, the blade that splits the moon and its reflection on the surface of the water. Even the moon floating on the water would be split by this blade. Was this all he could extinguish? Next time, he would have to do more. The seventh tactic is the unification of the sword with the earth, the ground parts before this sword. Thus, the blade is capable of cutting through anything, regardless of size. He couldn't understand why there wasn't a single scratch on it. The eighth tactic is a blade that destroys the heavens. Even the heavens will open before his sword. So is there anything in this world it can't cut? He tossed the sword aside and used the ninth tactic, fighting himself. Finally, his blade was ready, so there was no longer any reason to pick up a sword. He closed his eyes in exhaustion and realized that at best, this could only be called a good imitation. This was the final stage, fighting himself. He remembered his previous mentor when he was just a child, and his mentor asked him if he remembered. Xian replied that he remembered everything, but did such a mediocre swordsmanship deserve the name martial art? Even the explanation of the steps was utterly ridiculous. He cuts through the earth of the sky and even cuts himself? It seemed like these phrases were made up by a child to sound as cool as possible. The mentor replied that he couldn't deny it, but could he really allow the legacy passed down by his close friend to sink into oblivion forever? He couldn't inherit this martial art of swordsmanship, so he would do it in his stead, because he was the only swordsman who could cross swords with him on equal terms. Chion asked again, "What? Even without a single drop of profound energy?" He replied that he probably used the steps of refining profound energy, since those who had already joined the sects of the Orthodox Alliance couldn't properly master it, and he urged him to pass it on to someone who hadn't yet embarked on the path of apprenticeship. Steps of refining profound energy. What kind of trashy skill is that? The mentor flicked Cheon's forehead and yelled that he was just stating dry facts and should shut his mouth. Cheon grabbed his paws and replied, "Okay, basically, they're back to where he was before. If he swung this sword 1,000 times, his body would change, and if he swung it 100,000 times, his sword would begin to fill with energy. And if he swings this sword 1,000,000 times, it will be difficult for him to find an equal force anywhere in the world." That's what he said. So, if you swing the sword 1,000 times a day, you can master this fencing art in 3 years? Was this man really his equal, teacher? The mentor replied that he couldn't say for sure, because if they had gone to the very end, one of them would certainly have died. Cheon looked up at the sky and wondered how strong the warrior was, and who it was. At that moment, Masok became frightened when he saw Cheon unconscious and began slapping him on the cheeks. He was surprised that he was okay, because he was worried because he was still unconscious. Cheon replied that if he hit him one more time, he would finish him off. He didn't understand why he fainted from a single approach, let alone 1,000 times a day. Apparently, he had a long way to go. Masok said that although it was late, he needed to eat. Cheon asked again, "Is that pork?" Masok replied that he himself had told him to serve meat. They hadn't bought meat in a while, so he tried to cook it as deliciously as possible. Cheon replied that he should serve beef tomorrow. Masok was surprised and asked again, "Beef?" He replied that beef was better for building muscle. If the problem was a lack of money, then he should take as much as he needed from the moneylenders and give it to the manager so he wouldn't worry too much because he would have to borrow more money later. And until he and Dobo fought, he would eat only meat 3 times a day. He asked again, "By the way, young master, since when did he master this martial art?" Cheon wondered, why is he asking? Was that so strange? Indeed, someone who was unable to behave like a normal person suddenly began studying the art, They would also think it was strange. Masok replied, no, he was just a little surprised. He thought he knew nothing about martial arts. But suddenly, he smashed the bandits with a tiger's claws and set out to master the terrifying art of swordsmanship. Cheon swallowed and replied that he'd already told the kids this, so he'd tell him too. He wasn't really a son of this Munjin house. His true identity was a divine demon. Masok exclaimed that if he was going to spout nonsense, he'd better refrain. As for his fears, he was worried that he'd lose his memory again, as if he'd become a different person and suddenly vanish without a trace. But couldn't he say he intended to abandon the Yeomwa clan? Chon replied that he would never leave the family, at least not until the Yeomwa clan became the best martial arts family in Sacheon, and he had nothing better to do. Masok asked again. The best martial arts family? Cheon confirmed his thoughts, and Masok didn't understand what kind of absurd statement that was. Cheon flicked him on the forehead, causing a lump that was extremely painful. Cheon told him that if he was hanging around, he should leave. Masok replied that he was obeying his orders and immediately ran off. Cheon mused that if the Yeomwa clan became the best family in martial arts, he would also be satisfied with that result. Sometime later, the elders discussed the duel between Dobo and young Master Munjin in 10 days. That monster would definitely try to take young Master Munjin's life, and then he would come for the imperial inheritance bestowed upon the Yeomwa clan. Perhaps they should flee from here. Another elder was surprised and asked, what's he talking about? He tried to persuade him to think about it himself. Could they really allow the 2 remaining heirs to suffer as well? After some time, Cheon continued training until his strength failed him. He spent his days using the sword, so much so that his muscles had now strengthened somewhat. Although with great difficulty, he was now able to lift even a sword weighing 110 jin. But why was his swordsmanship still so unstable? Exactly 1 week remained until Dobo's duel, and Munjin was still training. When the guys entered his room, they looked at him, and he asked again, what brought them here? It's dangerous here, so they should find another place to play. The guys replied that they were worried about him and had been watching him for several days in a row and thought he was overexerting himself. Did he decide to push himself because Son had spoken harshly to him that day? She had simply lost her temper. Cheon exhaled and thought that when he saw them, he remembered those children. He patted their heads and told them that he was completely fine, so they shouldn't worry. Dojin exclaimed, by the way, Munjin, his stance looked truly amazing. He did it like this, right? He looked like a real warrior. She replied that the stance was not quite like that. The older brother stretched his arms forward even further. Cheon didn't understand. Were they imitating him now? What cute children they were. The sight of these children brought back memories of the days when he trained with the teacher. When swinging the sword, he should exhale as long as possible, and now try to freeze in one place and just take his time. And finally, he should return to the starting position. Take a slow, short breath, okay? He thought about it and realized that the most important thing in the 9-sword solo is the breathing technique. He forgot the teacher's words. After that, he told the guys not to worry about anything because he would definitely win, so they should quickly return to their rooms. He sent the children out of the room, and they looked back in surprise. After that, they laughed, wondering if he was really okay. After some time, a heavy rain passed. Chon looked out the window and thought that when swinging the sword he should exhale for as long as possible, then freeze in place, but under no circumstances should he rush. Returning to the starting position, he needs to exhale, and this should be a short, slow breath. The 5th tactic, the sword killer, releases all the internal energy accumulated in the body at once. This is success. He rejoiced, looking up and realized that the steps of despair of internal energy is a technique that allows you to create internal energy through direct body movement. Unlike other techniques that circulate energy through meditation, the steps of refining internal energy were classified as a low-level martial art, requiring the development of energy channels. But to effectively utilize these steps, a stable breathing technique is essential. Compared to the time when he struggled to even swing a sword, his body gradually stabilized thanks to the breathing technique appropriate for this martial art. Practicing this swordsmanship technique dozens of times, the core, which had been abandoned for several years, began to circulate internal energy again. Sometime later, during lunch, Masok was disturbed by an elder who asked if the young master was still training at his place. He was stunned and replied that he seemed like a different person. At first, he kept losing consciousness, but now there was no sign of exhaustion. It seemed the divine energy treatment he had received from the Mudan earlier had been effective. Huangbong wondered if even the treatment from the Mudan was the cause of his improvement after just one session. He asked him to let him know if any problems arose, and Masok passed by and shouted, okay. Huangbong frowned and thought. When Masok approached the young master, he was glad to see him and said he had brought his dinner, only to see him smash everything around him. He didn't understand what had happened here. Cheon replied that the space was tight and there wasn't enough room for his training. That's what he said. From now on, he would use the training grounds. When that day arrived, his enemies gathered around him. Cheon said, so there are guests here. Masok addressed the warriors as respected figures and informed them that the young master had said he would use the large training grounds from now on. They turned to him in bewilderment. And at that moment, Cheon slammed his sword on the ground and shouted that he needed the large training grounds for his personal training, so he would borrow this one for a while. He thought it would be more spacious there. There's another training ground nearby, so they can use it for training. The guys didn't understand what this Walking Dead man just said. Simply swinging a sword doesn't make anyone a martial artist, especially since the tip of his blade has never been stained with blood. He exclaimed, "Wow, what heated glances they're casting his way." One of the guys said, even though he is the young master of the Yoma clan, to suddenly come and talk like that. Before he could finish his sentence, the commander of the Yoma clan's death squad, Boyne, raised his hand and ordered everyone to step back. The young master said he was going to train in martial arts. Everyone got angry and walked past, whispering that it seemed his mania was returning. Cheon, hearing these words, told the idiot to stand still. Boyne was dumbfounded when he heard these words and turned around, asking if he had any complaints, to say them to his face. After all, only cowards hide their discontent. He asked again, what was he proposing? Cheon replied that if he had complaints among those who made a living, wasn't the answer obvious? He extended the tip of his sword toward his opponent's nose and said they should fight once. He was dumbfounded and said, "Young lord, no matter how distorted the morality of this world may be, I won't find a warrior here who would draw his sword against the one who would become the clan leader." Cheon replied that he had heard the saying, "A dog that bites doesn't bark, and one that barks is full of fear." If he wasn't going to take a step forward, then he shouldn't start barking, and should live like a frightened dog with his tail between his legs. Boyne became very angry and shook with rage, when suddenly he swung his sword and said that even if he regretted it later, he would not care. Cheon replied with a smile on his face that he did not know, because he was not one of those people who ever regretted anything. Masok closed his eyes in fear as he watched what was happening, and Cheon replied that he didn't know. Those around him watched his actions in surprise, and he continued, saying that he wasn't the kind of person who ever regretted anything. At that moment, he drew his sword from its sheath and thrust it into the ground, after which a struggle began between them. Boyne swung his sword sharply to strike the protagonist, but he deftly dodged the blow seconds later and grabbed him by the neck. Those around him didn't understand. Was he really fighting without a sword? And what kind of movement was that? Everyone watched Cheon in amazement as he changed, rarely lifting his feet to avoid being hit by Boyne's sword. Masok was sweating from fear, worried about his master. Boyne shouted at him to stop dodging and let him deflect his attacks with his sword. Cheon replied that that was right, that's what he should do. As Cheon plunged his sword into the ground, Boyne explained that he'd been a member of the Yumwa clan for 25 years, so he knew full well that the family had become what it was because of him, young Master Munjin. But now he suddenly started talking about martial arts. Cheon looked at him in surprise, after which their fight continued, and Boyne shouted that he should know his place. Cheon swung his sword and used the 9-sword solo tactic, the second tactic, Sword of Destruction. At that moment, he tensed, and Boyne realized what had just happened. That technique that had momentarily caused his internal energy to lose its stability. Cheon replied that what he'd said was true, but at that moment, he punched him right in the face, drawing blood, and Boyne began to fall to the ground. Cheon said that from now on, everything would be different. Boyne couldn't understand how this was even possible. His once clouded gaze had become completely different. These were the eyes of a true warrior, burning with determination, and he fell to the ground from a powerful blow. Everyone was surprised that young Master Munjin had won, and their mouths dropped open in shock. Boyne's friends ran up to him, asking if he was okay. Cheon asked, "No one has any complaints now, right?" One of the guys yelled that it was cowardly. Cheon turned around and asked, "What?" The guy replied that he knew Boyne couldn't hit him, young master. Boyne yelled at him to shut up at that moment, and rising from his knees, declared that this was his defeat. After a while, Boyne stood up and said he had taught him a lesson. Cheon replied if he'd learned it in 100 tries, he could go free. At that moment, he waved and told everyone to get out of the way and go train on the nearby training ground. Many of the guys left, leaving the training ground to the protagonist. He turned to Masok and told him to leave too. Masok looked at him in surprise, and then evening fell. One of Boyne's friends started screaming in anger. He might be their master, but weren't his actions too much? Why had he let him get away with everything? Boyne asked again. Who else had ever shown mercy? He thought he was already 1 foot in the grave. His friend asked again. Is that true? He replied, does he look like the type to lie? The guy replied that he didn't mean that, and Boyne said he didn't know what happened, but their crazy young master had received a chance granted by heaven itself. He wondered, a chance granted by heaven itself? And when had he managed to do that? There had been no reason to do so. Masok stood silently and said nothing. In any case, young Master Munjin had changed, so everything would probably be fine now. After some time, evening fell, and the elders began discussing the duel with the Blue Flower Guild tomorrow. Bakman turned to Huangbong and asked if he knew how many years had passed since they joined this clan. Huangbong replied that it had been about 37 years. Bakman noted that this was quite a long time. In his younger years, the Jute Flame Emperor was truly an unrivaled warrior. He appeared in the Jianghu alone and even the clan at the top could not deny his martial prowess. Hadn't they sworn to dedicate their entire lives to his light? However, now he had broken that oath. Bachman replied that they simply needed to somehow continue his lineage and martial legacy. Wangbong replied that he knew this and didn't need to convince him of it. For 17 years they cared for the insane young Master Munjin, and for another 17 years they protected the Yeomwa clan, which he had espoused with him. Even if they met the Jutei master in the afterlife, he wouldn't judge them, would he? More importantly, are the preparations complete? Bachman asked. Did they really need so much preparation? They just needed to grab some money to settle in the new place, and besides that, there were still a few warriors and 4 clan scrolls left. At that moment, he told Wangbong to go first. He was surprised and replied that, after all, he was his blood relative, and someone had to take care of his body. A hired guild master and a blue flower would be there to witness the duel. Wangbong noted that they were bragging for everyone to see about their plans to commit theft, but Bachman replied that they were simply saying they were confident of victory. The Blue Flower Guild, those evil snakes, would burn this place until not even the roots remained. He should go to the appointed place and wait for him there. The young master and mistress would probably be shocked. When a new day dawned, Masok and Cheon were having breakfast and began discussing how the meat had become tougher lately. Masok replied that he was just imagining things, since the cheapest parts of the cow are always the toughest. Cheon asked again, had they run out of money yet? He replied that he had no idea, that the steward was simply giving them little. Cheon asked again, was he offended or something? Masok asked again, could a servant be offended by such a trifle? The protagonist wondered then why he had mentioned running away and ended up getting slapped by him. At that moment, he stood up and asked, okay, let him tell me how he liked his outfit instead. Masok replied without any emotion that he didn't know, but he looked better. Cheon was upset and turning away said that they needed to go. Masok, with a hurt expression and a large bump on his head, replied, yes. As Cheon folded his sword behind his back, he met some elders along the way, who asked if he had decided to go. Cheon replied, Elder Bachman, please don't tell him that too has come to spout nonsense about wealth. Bachman replied that he hadn't even considered doing that. And Cheon asked again, oh really? Well then, let him wait here. He'll quickly dispatch those damned thieves in return. He replied that he would go with him, and an awkward silence ensued. Cheon realized the old man was very worried about him, but he would crush his opponents no matter what. Maybe the problem is that old people are naturally overly nervous about everything. Finally, when they reached the gate, Cheon confidently told everyone to follow him. After a while, a crowd of people gathered in the arena. This was supposed to be a duel to settle the dispute between the Blue Flower Guild and the Yeomwa clan. Those who wanted to place bets could hurry here. People were wondering what the betting odds were. Both men were neck and neck, so if he bet on the winning side, he would get half the payout. That sounded pretty good to the average person. They were discussing whether, if it was a martial arts match, it wouldn't be better to bet on the Yeomwa military family rather than the merchant guild. One of them decided to bet 2 nans of silver on the young master of the Yeomwa family. At that moment, people began shouting when they saw the young master and looked at him questioningly. Cheon walked confidently, nibbling on a sweet candy. The guy about to place a bet asked himself if he could cancel his 2 nans of silver bet on the Yeomwa family. Cheon grinned and told Bachman, watch it. He said he wasn't late. Bachman replied that he was eating so much before the fight, which was a bit improper. At that moment, a girl with an umbrella approached them and remarked that they hadn't seen each other in a while. It was Boo, who said that since he was her blood relative, she would ask again. Should he insist on this fight? He asked again. What? She said that the Yeomwa family challenged first. They don't have the talent for it, so why resort to something so reckless? Apparently, the rumors about his mania worsening were true. Cheon continued eating candy and thought, let everyone just look at her. She's talking as if this is a duel for her body. It seemed he had no choice but to pay in kind. He said there was no way the merchant guilds could take the Yeomwa family's secret martial arts from them, so he had to fight. Those around him began to wonder. What? They wanted to get their hands on a military clan's secret martial arts? Are the Blue Flower Merchant Guilds such a rotten house? They have no idea what's going on here. Boo pulled out her fan and said she was curious to see how long he would remain so relaxed. At that moment, the host announced, attention everyone, Ikkan of the Gongdong sect will be observing the duel. This is a fight between the guild's successor and Blue Flower, Dobo, and the young master of the Yeomwa clan, Munjin. Under his watchful eye, they will fight with honor and fairness. Many people raised their hands and shouted for the fight to begin. Dobo chuckled and said he saw that he had received the items they sent. Cheon asked, what did he just say? Dobo replied that the outfit he was currently wearing was the battle uniform of the Fire Emperor of the Yeomwa clan. He personally sent it to him to celebrate Munjin's return. Cheon asked, what is this? So, after the duel, he will have to return the rest? At that moment, he drew his sword and held it above himself. The people were surprised that the young master of the Yeomwa clan was a master of swordsmanship. But how could one practice fencing with such a large sword? By the way, wasn't the Fire Emperor a master of hand-to-hand combat? After these reflections, there was silence. And at that moment, Bachman turned to Masok and asked if the young master had said anything to him. Masok asked, what did he mean? When he had told him to run that morning, he had become very angry. Bachman asked again, did he suggest he run away? He replied that he was just joking, and, frankly, he was confident of the young master's victory. Although, with a trembling voice, he wondered if it would have been better to run away. No, the young master had changed, so he should give him a chance. But did such sudden changes happen? Bachman wondered if madness could be contagious, looking at Masok's strange behavior. At that moment, Ikgan shouted, "Are you all ready?" Cheon frowned, and Ikgan exclaimed that if both sides were ready, they would begin the fight. At that moment, he created a loud sound to begin the fight, and Cheon immediately rushed to attack his opponent. Dobo was surprised by his sudden movement, and a fierce battle broke out between them. The people around him couldn't understand why he was so fast. Hadn't people said that young Master Munjin had become more insane? He had heard that he had never even studied martial arts, so where did he get such strength? Dobo tensed when he realized his situation, and growled that they would see his abilities. A day-old puppy. He reached out to Cheon, and they began to fight. When Cheon received the first blow to the face, blood spurted from his cheek, after which they both moved to another place and found themselves facing each other. People shouted with joy at the sight of such an amazing fight. Boo, watching from the sidelines, thought that this surprised her, as she didn't expect Munjin to be so firm on his feet. However, compared to the martial arts Dobo had accumulated so far, he was a mere blank. Cheon struck his opponent's hair with a sharp sword, cutting off numerous clumps, and they continued to wrestle. When Cheon swung his sword, Dobo struck the ground so hard that a bright column of light shot straight into the sky. They had already fought amid thick dust from such a battle, and he thought that Munjin, today, they would drive him completely mad. When they found themselves facing each other, Dobo realized that allowing others to dominate was what he did best. With these thoughts, he pounced on his opponent, but Cheon continued to deftly dodge his attacks. Bachman remarked that he thought young Master Munjin would immediately be hit, but he was holding on like that. Masok noted that he didn't know the details, but it seemed the young master wasn't currently using his full strength. Bachman asked again, what had he suddenly said? He replied that he'd been secretly observing the young master's practice, so he could reasonably expect a more powerful, monumental strike from him. Meanwhile, the protagonist pondered. As far as he could tell, his current level was roughly on par with his opponent's. Was such a short break really enough to catch up? He wiped the sweat from his face and realized he didn't care. In the past, it had never mattered whether his opponent was stronger than him. After all, he'd killed them all, so he'd certainly kill this freak too. Their fierce battle continued at this pace. From the dilapidated hut, they traveled east for 5 kilometers, then another 3 kilometers, and that's how they managed to reach their destination. Fortunately, the young master and mistress had fallen asleep, so they were easily taken along. Some time ago, Wang Bong had asked Bachman if he was sure he wouldn't go with him. Bachman replied that he remained his blood relative, so someone should be there to take care of his funeral. He would be a witness who would personally oversee young Master Munjin's final journey. Wang Bong said that they would then go first and meet at the appointed place. He was still unsure if they were doing the right thing. Meanwhile, Munjin continued to fight. He understood that Dobo was quite good for his age, but in the end, he was still feeling a little shaky. The people watched the battle in surprise and hope, wondering why they looked evenly matched. Did it even seem like young master had the advantage? One of the spectators replied that he had heard that the second Engel Blue Flower was a disciple of the Gongdong sect, but his skills weren't all that outstanding. Xian gritted his teeth in anger and charged at his opponent, just as Bachman shouted, "Young Master Munjin." Masok also shouted at him, begging him to dodge, and at that moment, Bu smiled in anticipation. Qian used the 9 swords solo technique. First tactic, a swift thrust. When he dodged the attack with this tactic, everyone was stunned by what they saw. Could he really have blocked such a powerful blow? Dobo gritted his teeth in anger, not understanding what was happening. He hadn't expected this turn of events at all, and Chan looked him in the eye and smiled. Dobo called him a freak, and their fight continued. Bachman thought that the young master was concentrating all his internal energy and would most likely deliver the final blow now. Masok was frightened, but at that moment, Dobo shouted that everything was happening too slowly. He was concentrating his internal energy too slowly for the attack. Qian used the 9 sword solo technique, second tactic, a sword of destruction. When a bright flash of light erupted between them, Dobo realized his failure and realized how helpless he was against him. Qian walked toward him with a smile on his face, and their swords clashed again. Dobo was horrified at losing to this freak who didn't have a drop of internal energy. A moment later, his sword was shattered and broken in two, and his arm was severed. Dobo saw blood and cried out in pain and horror, after which Qian kicked the ground and kicked him in the chest. When Dobo, defeated, flew to the side and fell in a pool of his own blood, Bu exclaimed in horror. Dobo. Everyone was stunned by the horrific sight, and Bachman and Masok were dumbfounded. The arena fell silent as everyone saw Dobo destroyed. Had young Master Munjin really won? Qian took his hand and raised it up, saying that he accepted this as payment for 17 years of resentment. Bu asked with a trembling voice, "What did he just say?" He said that since it was about the Blue Flower Guild, he thought they would find a way to get it back. At that moment, Ikan leaped up and ran up to Dobo, placing his hand on his chest. He announced that his energy core had also been destroyed. Boo also descended into the arena in horror, and Ikon asked if it was really necessary to go so far. Xion asked, what was he talking about? Ikon rose to his feet and replied that there was a clear gap in skill and that the duel had long since ended. Xion asked, really? If he maintained that attitude, he could be held accountable too. Was it really necessary to use a spell on a 5-year-old who knew nothing about martial arts? He'd simply closed his gestalt. From now on, they would have to pay for provoking the Yomwa clan, and they must prepare well for it. Boo fell to her knees after hearing this, clenching her fist. She thought she would never forgive him. The people watched the scene in shock and began raising their hands in support. Just think, he crushed a sect disciple in just a few moves. This was a swordsmanship they'd never seen before. This was the birth of a new martial artist. Bakman approached Munjin with Masok and they ran closer, and Xion announced they were returning. Bakman asked again, what? After that, he immediately agreed and wondered if young Master Munjin had always had such a broad back. After this, Xion turned and said, by the way, manager, about that. But before he could finish, Bakman wondered if he'd guessed they were planning to run away. He'd said he was talking about the gold he'd entrusted to him. Had he already spent it all? Bakman laughed and replied, of course not, there's only a little left. Xion said it looked like he'd have to look into the chain again, and the tiger's claws had gotten tougher lately. And one more thing, regarding Elder Huangbong and the other warriors, he didn't care if they decided to leave the clan. But if they tried to separate him from his younger brother and sister, they'd have to put their lives on the line. Meanwhile, Huangbong was with the young mistress and master, away from their clan. Soan was saying that today was the day of her elder brother's duel. How could he act like that? Dojin was also displeased and said he'd never forgive him this time. Huangbong asked them to stop and let him read the message that had arrived via carrier pigeon. When he read it, he explained that they were in a difficult situation. Munjin had won the duel, their escape plan had been discovered, and they must return immediately. The protagonist said thoughtfully, by the way, since they're on the topic of money, he thinks it's time to deal with the debt trap. Bakshin asked, the debt trap? He replied, right, he's talking about those idiots from the Bangho sect. He didn't think it was time to resolve this issue. He'll take care of everything himself. He, the manager of Do, must return to the residence. He replied, but still, he thought, even though the duel had shown that the young master wasn't the same as before, he still had some time. The next second, MC said, old man, he worries too much. He held out his hands and told him to try not to get involved with the Sosal sect squad under any circumstances. He replied, oh my good. He left. After that, Masok approached the protagonist and asked, young master, is he really planning to go to the Bangho sect like this? He folded his arms and replied, that's right. He doesn't want to put off the troublesome work. Then he turned around and, smiling, added, Masok, he just needs to stay behind his older brother and not worry about anything. Did he understand? He answered in the affirmative. After some time, the Bangho sect money lending house. Jimbo walked forward and asked, oh, is he here already? He thought that he really never thought he would see him again. He can't believe he crippled that idiotic second son at the Chonghua Merchant Guild. Then the protagonist said that he came to pay his bills. He walked further and added, it's kind of quiet here. Has their business gone down the drain or something? He replied that it's not like that. It's just that most of the players went to watch his fight, young master. He asked, everyone went to watch his fight? They guys must have bet on his fight too, right? The next second, Junbo and several of his subordinates bowed sharply. They shouted that they were apologizing. They didn't mean to be disrespectful. And he walked forward and said that he was sure they realized that the chances of him winning were higher. So they must have made a lot of money on their bet? Junbo said, yes sir. He thought, really? After that, the protagonist said, it seems they made a good amount of money thanks to him, but they're not going to keep it quiet, right? He thought, damn it, he's decided to corner them again. He replied, of course that's not true. They were just about to properly express their gratitude to him. He asked, is that so? He sat down at the table and added, excellent, he's glad to hear it. Then Jinbo looked at him and thought, unlike last time, a cold air had gathered around him. This is a real martial artist, burning with killing intent. Then the protagonist asked, so where is his boss? He wondered, why does he need him? The protagonist put his hand on the table and said he didn't like asking twice or thrice. If he didn't answer, he'd do it personally. Before he could finish speaking, the leader of the Bangho sect, Che Woonjol, entered the room. The MC looked at him and asked if he was their leader. Woonjol said his guys had told him about him. The protagonist asked if he'd asked to meet once, so why make things so complicated? Well, he has a pretty cute face, and that bug behind him, his lackey? The next second, Black Crow from the Sosal sect walked forward. Energy enveloped his body, and he said, he sees that this brat has no manners at all. So, that means he's the idiot who coveted their money? The MC frowned and wondered if he was from the Sosal sect. Then he asked, how dare he interfere in an adult conversation? Was he tired of living? In response, he laughed, and then suddenly jumped into the attack and shouted, well, he should try to kill him once. At that moment, Masok excitedly shouted, young master! And the protagonist twirled the wand in his hand and said that he didn't care whether he was from the Sosal sect or not. If he got in his way, then first he would earn a hole in his body. With these words, he threw the wand forward, piercing the attacker's arm completely. Then, Black Crow smiled and thought that he was some kind of little idiot, but he was quite an unusual guy. Then he said that he couldn't believe he pierced his arm with chopsticks. What an interesting kid. MC noted that this was not what he wanted to hear from a green idiot like him. The next second, Black Crow jumped into the attack again and told him to keep his nose in the air. The protagonist also moved forward, but with a sharp jump, he managed to dodge Black Crow's attack, whose fist punched a hole in the floor. From above, the protagonist asked what he was looking at. Black Crow looked surprised and then spun around sharply, slamming his hand in front of him, but the protagonist managed to dodge to the side and then smirked, and the attacker thought, "What the hell? How did this brat manage to dodge his attack?" Then MC declared that he would make another hole. Black Crow caught the stick flying towards him, but the momentum had already pierced his body. He dropped to one knee, while bodily fluid dripped from his injured eye. The protagonist approached him and asked, "How is it? Is the air flowing well?" He shouted. What an idiot. Now that he touched him, the brothers from the Social Sect Squad will begin their action. He asked, "Oh, is that so?" He shouted that now his family and subordinate wouldn't be safe either. But the next second, the protagonist added a kick to his face and asked, "Social Sect? Let him come if he has the courage, but first he will kill him here." He screamed. "He must wait. He will give him everything, both his wealth and his concubines, but please, he must spare his life." The protagonist asked, "What? He suddenly wanted his life?" He didn't need his concubines, but he liked the words about wealth. Black Crow shouted that everything was in Daochang. That is, he would definitely bring him here. He replied, "Okay, that's the right approach. But if he suddenly doesn't return, then he will have to breathe through an additional hole that he will punch in his face." He shouted that he will definitely come back. Then the protagonist looked at the head and said, "Now how about we start the debt write-off procedure again?" The next second, Woonjul fell to his knees and began bowing, begging him for mercy. The MC came closer and asked, "Him too?" He looked up at him and shouted that he would give him all his property. The protagonist asked what he was talking about. Everything that belonged to him was already his. He was surprised. What was he talking about? He replied that if you take the 7,000 yang profit they took from ordinary people and add the cost of their lives, the idiots who constantly interfered in the affairs of a military family, wouldn't that amount equal his entire fortune? He said that in that case, he would give him his entire fortune. But the next second, the MC left a hole in the man's head and noticed that he didn't understand human speech at all. Why did he keep repeating that he would give up what was already his? Then the leader fell lifeless to the ground, while those present watched perplexed. Then the protagonist turned around and asked when the next person in line after that idiot would arrive. Junbo stepped forward and said he was the deputy head. He asked, He didn't know. Then Junbo bowed and shouted, "That's right. He's asking, please. He must spare his life. From now on he will live a righteous life, so he begs him to give him a chance." And the protagonist sat down at the table and folding his arms, said, "Well fine, he can live." After that, he placed the documents on the table and asked, "So what is the current net worth of that dead man? If you add up the value of the house, the kyoban, and all the cash, it comes to about 4,000 nyang in gold. Then what are the assets of the money-lending house?" Junbo raised his hand and said, "Taking into account all the establishments, at least 10,000 yang in gold, and a separate payment of 500 yang in gold to the Sosal sect must be made this month." Then MC began to read the document and said, "Okay, they'll look into it. The entire fortune of the Bangho sect leader is 4,000 yang, and the business he stole must naturally be returned to his family. The total assets of the Bangho sect are 10,000 yang in gold, plus a payment of 500 yang in gold to the Sosal sect. If we add compensation for moral damages, the total amount is 20,000 yang in gold. He thinks he's judged fairly." Junbo shouted that he'll immediately prepare all the documents and bring them here. He replied, "Okay." He offered to complete all the documents right now and complete the gold transfer. He shouted, "Yes." Then the protagonist rested his chin on his folded hands and said, "Now isn't it time to discuss the value of the remaining people's lives?" With these words, he looked at the two men standing before him and added that he had said he would spare him, but there was no mention of their lives being spared. They cried out that they were begging for mercy. After a while, Baekshun stood next to a huge number of chests and cried out in surprise, "What's all this?" MC stood behind him and explained that he had sorted out the debt pile. Each chest contained 400 nyang in gold. He said, "Young Master Hua." He turned and asked, "Didn't he tell you who was behind the moneylender's house?" The protagonist replied that he had mentioned the Sosal sect. He asked if he knew who the Sosal sect was doing business with. He replied that he didn't. Did he really need to know? He replied, "Jusugong from the Red Sword Sect clan, sworn brothers of Black Crow and Red Crow from the Sosal Sect squad." Then the protagonist asked, "Isn't this Black Crow the one with all 10 fingers pitch black?" Baekshun cried out in surprise, "Have they met before?" He replied that that was right. He had stabbed him in the eye with a chopstick. He was surprised. "What?" And then the protagonist said, "Lord Du, such an opponent may be too strong for him or Elder Cho, but he shouldn't hold him to his standards. If there's a pesky bug flying around, he'll just swat it and be done with it. Anyway, for dinner tonight, he wants to eat the most tender veal, and when his younger brother and sister return, he must take care of their dinner too." He waved his hand and, turning in the opposite direction, added that he would go to his room first. Baekshun watched him go silently, thinking that Black Crow was feared throughout Sichuan province. but he dismissed a master of such stature as a mere nuisance. Whether during the duel or now, he continued to wonder if this was really the same young Master Hua he knew. After a while, a subordinate said, "The Yomwa sect set a trap. She must be shocked by the outcome of the duel." Guildmaster Choyan stood in front and said that for someone hired to serve him, he was too talkative. As she had said, he must leave only one child alive and bring him here. He could kill the rest. She didn't care. But he must remember, one child must be alive and unharmed. He laughed in response and said he understood. He'd be back before the sunset. Then Choyan raised the figure above the map and thought, Huamujin. She would tear apart everything he held dear, right before his eyes. The Yomwa sect had once enjoyed its own era of glory. Countless martial artists, captivated by the personality and skill of the man dubbed the Fire Emperor, filled the training grounds. Even the noble Tong family of Sichuan held his talent and character in high esteem. In just one generation, the Yomwa sect had established itself as a military family no one could ignore. It was a time when even renowned masters dared not touch the warriors of the Yomwa sect, and when they appeared on the streets of Seochang, all the residents greeted them warmly. But after the Fire Emperor's death, during the process of transferring the position of head of the family to his successor, the entire world discovered the latter's incompetence. Thus, the Yomwa sect gradually declined, and even those who had sworn allegiance began to renounce it one by one. The image of the Fire Emperor who once commanded the world. To the sects of the righteous path, he was a great hero. To his enemies, a master capable of suppressing anyone. He truly was a hero for the ages. Baekshun wondered, why did the back of the retreating young master now remind him of the image of the Fire Emperor? The next moment, he heard someone calling out loudly for him. He turned around and, noticing his subordinates struggling to catch their breath, asked, "No, why are they here? Wait, why is it only they? Where are the young master and mistress?" One of them shouted that assassins sent by the Chongwa Guild had suddenly attacked them. Elder Cho and the warriors fought with all their might, but the assassins were overwhelming. Then Baekshun thought, the young master and young mistress are in danger. He shouted that they must report this to young Master Hua immediately. He would go there first. They shouted, "Yes," and then he rushed off. Meanwhile, one of the warriors asked, "Are they the only ones left now?" They weren't going to kill everyone, so he should think carefully. With his foolish actions, he could send all the little ones to the grave. With these words, he laughed, and Huangban angrily shouted, "What idiots!" The next second, Baekshun arrived, knocking the weapon out of the warrior's hand. His fan returned to him, and he looked at his opponents and said that he had better go quietly home. Then one of the warriors shouted. Another appeared. "Kill." They rushed to the attack while Baekshun fought them. Then the warrior shouted. The only one who came to help was a decrepit old man. Baekshun dealt a few blows, and then Huangban shouted, "Watch out!" Baekshun noticed a warrior preparing to attack. The next second, he swung his sword while Baekshun flipped to the side and shouted, "Damn!" He skidded to a stop on the ground and held his folded fan in front of him, blocking the enemy's attack. The warrior who had attacked him shouted that he could handle him. They should take one child and kill the rest. Baekshun shouted, "Idiots!" The next warrior charged, shouting that he should die already. He struck the steward in the chest and shouted that he was finished now. He added another cut to his body, and Baekshun fell to the ground right in front of the children. One of the warriors asked, "Of these two brats, which one should be killed and which one should be saved?" Then Soyeon looked at her brother in fear, clenched her fist and said, "Brother." He stepped forward and covered her with his hand. One of the warriors swung his sword and shouted in surprise, "If that's what he wants, then he will kill him." The next second, everyone present heard a loud cry. "Everyone, freeze." The protagonist was running toward them. The warrior wondered, is that some crazy Mujin? The man asked, "Can they kill him, right?" His colleague said that if he starts interfering with their work, they will kill him too. Then the protagonist stopped next to one of the warriors. He was ready to strike and shouted that he saw that he wanted Mujin dead. In response, the protagonist delivered a powerful blow, shattering the enemy's weapon, and then struck again in front of him, splitting the attacker in two. He rushed forward, and the others were surprised. "What is this?" they screamed. "Everyone, we must kill him." The MC advanced, dealing with everyone in his path. Then he used the 9-sword solo, the fifth tactic, the assassin's sword. He delivered several slashing attacks, spinning around. The remaining warriors looked at him in surprise, and then one of them charged, screaming loudly. He swung his weapon in front of him several times, but the protagonist easily dodged it, then decapitated his opponent. One of the warriors screamed in fear, "It's a monster!" But then MC threw his weapon forward, cutting off the arm of one of the warriors. He fell to his knees, clutching his wounded shoulder, and screamed loudly in pain. The protagonist told him not to dare move even his fingertips if he didn't want to die. Then he looked back. Soyeon closed her eyes and, looking through the hole between her fingers, asked, "Brother?" And Dojin covered her eyes with his hand and shouted for her not to look, and she was surprised. "What? Why? Didn't Big Brother come here too? Didn't he eliminate all the bad people?" He shouted, "That's right, but you can't look." Then the protagonist approached them and asked, "Are they okay?" The boy looked up at him and replied, "Yes, absolutely." MC said, "He must have been scared." He replied, "Not at all. After all, he was the son of a warrior." The protagonist then placed his hand on his head and said he was proud of him. After that, he looked at Elder Cho and told him to go back with the wounded warriors and his younger brother and sister. He lifted the steward on himself and replied, "Yes." They quickly rushed to the infirmary. Then the protagonist said, "So, How much longer do you intend to moan, left with only one arm? Was he sent by that ugly woman from the Chongwa Guild? He came closer and added that if he answered his questions properly, he might let him live. The warrior shouted, "Is he really letting him live?" He replied that he wouldn't tell you twice. He could simply snap his finger and destroy them all, starting with him. He replied, "That's right. They were hired by the head of the Chongwa Guild, Choyan. She found them through the Ark of the Dispossessed. He really won't kill him?" At that moment, the protagonist reached for the sword lying on the ground and said that if he didn't want to die, he should run as fast as he could to that idiot and tell her how Wamujin from the Yomwa sect had killed them all here and how he intended to kill them all in the future. After a while, the people gathered were surprised. "Hey, he should look there. That's blood. Who is he? He's even asking? This is a madman from the Yomwa family. Maybe he's completely lost his mind?" Well, his condition has clearly worsened. Those who saw him walking along the road covered in blood couldn't help but laugh at him, look at him with disdain. The conversations continued. By the way, did he hear that he single-handedly dealt with the Bangho sect? Did he really defeat those vile idiots? That's exactly it. He even crippled the second son of the Chonghua Merchant Guild. Mujin, once dubbed the Crazy Young Master, was now known as the Sleeping Dragon Seochang. People said it was amazing, even though he had once been a child visited by even Shaolin monks, calling him a miracle blessed by heaven. Could it be that that talent had blossomed again? After a while, the MC opened the door before him, stepped into the domain, and Maesuk, tears in his eyes, ran toward him, shouting, "Young master!" What a relief. He's walking on 2 legs, and he doesn't see any injuries on his body. The protagonist stopped him with a hand and said he was perfectly fine. More importantly, "Have everyone else been taken to the infirmary yet?" He replied, "Yes, not a single warrior escaped injury. The second young master and Miss Soyeon are resting in their rooms seeking peace of mind." He said, "Okay, he should prepare a bath for him immediately." He replied, "Yes, please wait a moment." After a while, the protagonist sank into the warm bath. He closed his eyes, remembering the faces of his brother and sister. He thought, rest to regain composure sounded unthinkable for the children of a martial clan, but he still had no desire to show those two the cruelties of this world. If only he could make them live, seeing only the beautiful and good around them. Is he projecting images of someone else onto these children? He gathered water in his hands and, looking at the image that appeared there, released the water from his hands. Then he turned his gaze to the moon in the window. The next day at the hospital. Sitting on the hospital bed, Wang Bon shouted, "Is he asking about the Red Flame manual?" MC stood nearby and answered, "Yes, that's it." Why was he so surprised? Was he asking for something he couldn't have? He asked in return, "Can I know why he was asking about this manual?" The protagonist asked, "What is it?" He was afraid that in a fit of madness, he would tear up the secret manual. He replied that it wasn't that. The protagonist frowned and added, "Or can't he share information about his clan's secret technique with him? They'll start tomorrow. He'll personally train those two, okay?" His face clearly showed disbelief and doubt. Wang Ban replied that it wasn't. Then MC said, "Elder Cho, he has nothing to worry about, so he shouldn't worry." He replied, "Okay." Then he handed over the book and said, "Here it is, the manual." The protagonist took it, turned to leave, and said that in that case, he was going, they should rest. Wang Ban and Baeksin bowed after him and wished him to take care of himself. After that, Wang Ban sat on the edge of the bed and asked if everything would be all right. Baeksin told him not to worry too much. After all, he had seen with his own eyes how amazing the young master was with the sword. His seizures had recently stopped, and he was clearly on the mend. Honestly, he seemed to have completely recovered. The Taoist treatment must have finally worked. He asked if this treatment also improved martial arts skills. He had never heard of anything like that. Although, if you think about it, there's no other explanation for his sudden improvement. Baeksin added, unless some fateful encounter had occurred in his life, and the elder said it wasn't just any encounter. To have reached such heights in such a short time, he clearly crossed paths with a great master, and no other explanation fits here. The shadow that had hung over Yomwa sect for 17 years finally dissipated. Sometime later, Yomwa sect, the training ground. The MC stood in front of the children and said, "Where there's a butterfly dance, there's also a bee buzz." Soyeon looked at him and asked, "Brother, what does that mean?" She found it hard to understand. In response, he thoughtfully said that he would now try to explain it differently. That is, it means standing toward the opponent as if freezing their legs in place, while their movements remain as free as a butterfly's. This is a fundamental movement technique that he created himself, based on countless real-life combat experiences. They looked at him in surprise and said, "Wow." And Soyeon said thoughtfully, "But it sounds weird." Elder Cho said that he didn't have any real combat experience until now. Then Dojin whispered to her, "Hey, how can she say something like this in his face?" And then the protagonist put his hands on his waist and said, "Well, enough theory. They'll move on to real fights. The two of them should attack him with the basic fist technique they mastered earlier." They took a stance, and Soyeon, smiling, said, "Okay, here we go, brother." Then she screamed and they started throwing punches. MC was surprised and thought, What are they doing now? What is this pathetic hand-waving? Are they really from a military family? Maybe they're still too young? But even if it's just a matter of age, the situation is still absurd. They have no idea how to balance their weight or rotate their lower bodies. They don't even have a clue about how to control their bodies. Then he shouted, "Enough!" He put his hand to his head and said he had a headache, so they'll stop here today. Soyan asked worriedly, "Are you okay, brother?" He said their skills were much better than he thought, but before they could begin learning advanced techniques, they needed to strengthen their bodies. They should return to the residence. They'd see each other for dinner. After they headed for the exit, the protagonist sighed loudly and said, "It won't be easy." Then he smiled and thought, teacher. It had been hard for him, it seemed. He regretted that the sex succession had ended in his generation, but he would simply restore this ruined clan to its former glory and then continue to walk the path of their sect once again. And then, having found the owner of that damn sword mark, whom he had failed to find in his past life, he would definitely kill them. With these thoughts, he grabbed his sword and held the weapon out in front of him. He began swinging it back and forth and thought that he was now able to lift the sword with one hand. He could feel the flow of energy in the air, and with each repetition of sword tactics, his speed increased. A few days later, Wangbon, with an injured arm, walked forward and said that he was back in action. MC bowed and said that it was excellent, and Masok waved his hands and asked, "Excellent? Is that all he could say? Does he even know what they went through protecting the second young master and Miss Soyeon?" The protagonist asked. Who asked them to create such difficulties for themselves? If he had been even a little late, everyone would have returned lying in coffins. If they pulled such a stupid act again, they should know that he would be the first to send them to the grave. The men bowed and apologized. And then Do Yeonsu walked forward and said that the improvement was truly obvious. Didn't he say that only he could heal the young master? A few more repetitions, and he would be completely healed. Masok, looking at him, cried out in surprise. What? That man? Right. Before he could finish speaking, the protagonist walked forward and, looking at the guest, asked, "Who is he? He has no food to give him. He must leave." Masok cried out in alarm. "Oh my, young master, he should watch his tongue. After all, he was the one who healed him." Then Masok turned to Yeonsu and cried out that he apologized. Taoist, their young master was not completely cured yet. Then the protagonist kicked Masok and told him to go away. He smiled and added that he had been extremely rude. He apologized for not recognizing him. He had come a long way, so he must be hungry? Perhaps they should go inside first? Taoist, a few days ago. Masok smiled and said that the Taoist was the heir to the Wudong sect Taoist lineage. Healing with lingering energy? Yes, it was that man, renowned for his miraculous martial arts, who treated him. He didn't know all the details, but the senior manager had paid a considerable sum to invite him here. In the present, MC smiled and thought, so it was him? He offered to let them in. Yeonsu stepped forward and, clearing his throat, said, "Very well." After that, the protagonist closed the gate behind them, and then said that he had heard that he had inherited the Wudong sect Taoist lineage. Yeonsu smiled and remarked that it was true. It was a little embarrassing to say this himself, but he was the only Taoist to have inherited the true essence of the true Wudong sect lineage. He was the Wudong White Immortal. The next second, the protagonist appeared next to him, and he cried out in surprise, "What?" The protagonist looked at him with a crazy look and asked, "So he claims to be a Wudong White Immortal? Funny. He hasn't heard of any of the heirs of the Wudong Taoist lineage even surviving." He replied, "That's nonsense. He really is." Before he could finish speaking, the MC told him to listen, old man. He must tell the truth while he can. After that, there will be no turning back. He was indignant. What was he saying? Was he doubting him? He was the one. Before he could finish speaking, the protagonist reached the weapon behind his back and told him to continue, to keep talking. He would try to truly believe him. Then he raised his sword up and added, "If he really is a Wudong Taoist, dodging this sword would be a piece of cake for him, right?" Yeonsu looked at the huge weapon in fear, and then jumped aside as the sword fell. He raised himself up on the ground and screamed, "What is he doing? They have to stop him." Masok shouted excitedly, "Young master, why is he doing this? The man in front of him really is." Before he could finish speaking, the protagonist ordered him to be quiet. He must bring him a bucket of water, quickly. He would show them something funny. He was surprised and asked, "Excuse me?" After a while, the protagonist poured water on Yeonsu, and he looked at him and indignantly shouted, "What madness is this? Does the fiery Hua clan repay kindness by humiliating its savior?" Before he could finish speaking, the protagonist grabbed him by the beard and then yanked it hard, tearing it from his face. Those present looked at him in surprise and asked, "Is it a fake beard?" And MC added, "And he glued it on so neatly too. Filthy charlatan." After a while, they went into the building, and the protagonist shouted indignantly, "The impudence, trying to deceive him of all people. He actually believed it." Then Masok looked at the protagonist and asked, "Young master, what is he going to do with him?" He replied that he can't just let him go. He smiled madly and said, "Maybe chopping off his limbs and crippling him would be just right." Yeonsu screamed, "He's begging for mercy. He must have mercy. He's asking him not to kill him." And then the protagonist smiled and said that he won't kill him. If he dies, how will he get his money back? He'll just cut off a couple. Before he could finish speaking, Yeonsu began shaking with fear and screamed that he begged him to keep his arms and legs. He'll give back everything he stole. The protagonist remarked that this went without saying, but he'll also charge him for his useless limbs and manhood. He screamed, Anything but that. He'll pay whatever he says. Then the protagonist turned around and asked the head manager, how much did he charge him? He replied, 50 gold nyang. The MC asked, 50? Was he so easily fooled? He was too trusting. What had he even been doing all these years? Baekshun adjusted his glasses and said that he heard that he was a great healer. The next second, the protagonist, angry, shouted at him to stop already. Enough. He can't listen to this anymore. He heard him. He can start with those 50 gold nyang. Yeonsu, kneeling, said that he didn't have that money on him right now. If they go to his residence in Jinyang, the protagonist walked forward and asked, 4 hours journey, right? He should lead. Then Hwangbon shouted, young master, should they come with him too? He turned around and shouted at them not to waste his time. With their weak bodies, what can they do there? And they'll have to bury their bodies too. They should stay home and stay out of trouble. He walked up to the door and shouted, he must go, you charlatan. He must show the way. He followed him and replied, yes sir. Then Baekshun put his hand on the elder's shoulder and with a loud sigh, told him to just trust him on this. He said, young master, he's not the same person he used to be. After a while they went outside and the protagonist thought, damn, I should have brought a horse with me. There aren't any animals in this damned place. Then Yeonsu turned around, looked at him and said, this is the carriage he arrived in. He should get in, please. The MC, looking at this, said, he must have stolen a lot. He assessed the carriage and added, it's a great 4-horse carriage. Impressive. After that, he went inside sighing loudly, noticing the seats. He added, it's also luxuriously decorated inside. Yeonsu said, cotton upholstery, leather trim. He travels all over the country on business, so comfort is a must. The protagonist remarked that he really has a strong work ethic for a con artist. If he's such a professional, why not do the honest stuff? He bowed and replied that he would definitely do so from now on. Then the protagonist sat down on the seat and, putting his hands behind his head, said that he would get some sleep. He should wake him up when they arrived. He replied that he understood. He should rest, sir. After that, the protagonist fell asleep, and Yeonsu got angry and thought that he should just wait. Idiot. After that, he told the coachman to go. After some time, the carriage stopped on a forest road. Yeonsu got out of the carriage and, looking at the man in the distance, said that they had arrived. He pointed at the carriage with his hand, adding that he was fast asleep inside the carriage. He must pull him out and set an example for everyone. Then Cholmuk gritted his teeth and thought, again? Why would anyone even try to interfere with a Taoist who seeks to guide the misguided masses? He climbed into the carriage and thought, this is the price he will pay for his foolish interference. He must not hold a grudge against them. With these thoughts, he swung his fist, concentrating his energy, and then struck, but looked ahead in surprise, noticing how his fist was stopped by the protagonist's weapon, who asked, what the? Are they already here? After that, he swung his weapon, attacking Cholmuk, who closed in, crossing his arms over his chest. The powerful attack sent him flying out of the carriage and skidding to a stop on the ground. Yeonsu, noticing this, shouted in surprise, what? And then Cholmuk said, hidden dragon Seochung. So he really wasn't just talking nonsense. The next second, MC approached the carriage exit and asked, since when had Jinyang become such a dense thicket? Had he been targeting him from the start? He thought he was just a swindler, but it seemed he was also good at scheming. However, he was still starting to get bored. He concentrated energy in his body and added that they would see what he could do. Then Cholmuk shouted, everyone, come out! The man stepped forward and said that this upstart was digging his own grave. 4 Zhongshan demons stood in front of the protagonist. He looked at them and smiling said, their appearance is scarier than hell, honestly. He wondered, demonic energy? Then he placed a sword in front of him and added that their weapons, as far as he could see, were different. He released streams of powerful energy and said that he would see what they could do. He then leaped to attack Cholmuk, who held out his hands, trying to block his blow. The other brothers watched as the protagonist also pressed Cholmuk. Changtae ran up to them, shouting, that bastard. He was only aiming for one person. Nosak ran after him, shouting that they should go and help him. Meanwhile, Cholmuk, gritting his teeth, tried to block the protagonist's attacks. He shouted, idiot. He thought he was coming down like a mace. How heavy. Then the protagonist added another blow, but Cholmuk dodged to the side, then swung his fist, and the protagonist said that he was nothing special after all. With these words, he kicked the ground, and then kicked his opponent in the face. He then spun around, dodging Changtae as he made his way towards him, then spun sharply and added an elbow strike to his torso. The remaining 2 brothers also aimed at him, but MC dodged their attacks and also punched one of them in the torso. He then kicked off the ground and leaped at the next brother, smashing his opponent's sword with his weapon and kicking him in the stomach, sending him flying backwards. The protagonist, looking at their trembling bodies, thought they were definitely using demonic arts. How was this possible? Demonic arts in the very center of the Celestial Empire? He didn't want to kill young followers of the demonic path. What should he do? Then he heard a scream. He must wait. Cholmuk knelt down and said they had lost. He must spare them. And Yeonsu, watching what was happening, thought, damn, it's impossible that the 4 Zhongshan demons would be defeated so ingloriously. Then Cholmuk added, after the first exchange of blows, it was clear they were no match for him. MC looked at him and asked, then why did they continue and expose themselves? Do they enjoy getting hit on the head? Fine, he'll spare them. He'll only destroy their energy cores and sever their meridians. Cholmuk looked at him in fear. then slammed his head on the ground and shouted, "Sir, they were only following orders. Please, he shouldn't take their lives as martial artists." And the protagonist told them not to whine at a certain age. He walked closer and asked who they studied under. He looked surprised. What did he mean? The protagonist shouted in irritation. "What else?" he asked. Who was their teacher? It was ridiculous to call what they had demonic energy, but it was definitely it. Few people in the Central Plains wield demonic energy. Who taught them the demonic arts? Cholmuk replied that until the year he was last alive, they didn't even know his name. The protagonist asked, "What kind of students are they who don't know their mentor's name?" And he shouted back that he told them not to look for his other students. MC said irritably, "I see. Then they should have been sitting quietly and honing their pathetic martial arts, but instead they took up stealing?" Cholmuk raised his hands and shouted, "Steal? No, they weren't thieves. They only helped their brother with his chores from time to time." The protagonist asked, "They said chores?" They knew what kind of person he was, but they still helped? He replied that they thought saving living people was a righteous deed, didn't they? Then the protagonist turned around and said, "Enough. They must leave. From now on, they are no longer to serve him. If he sees them again, they will die." All the other brothers knelt down and shouted that they're grateful to him, Lord. Then the protagonist approached the carriage and, turning to Yunsu, said that he must pay the ransom for these people, reimburse the cost of his life, as well as compensate him for his lost stamina and moral damage for everything that happened. And Yunsu indignantly whispered, What moral damage?" he shouted. "Does such a thing even exist?" After that, the carriage set off, and Cholmuk, looking after them, said that his teacher said that they are poor thinkers and too trusting. He said that they need to be very careful with those with whom they associate. If they ever meet a strong and noble man, they must follow him and serve him. Okay, their thoughts are in sync. Meanwhile, the protagonist sat inside the carriage, folding his arms across his chest and asking why he stopped again. He irritably opened the carriage doors and was surprised to see his brothers kneeling in front of him. They shouted, "Boss!" Cholmuk sat in front and shouted that they pledged allegiance. They will serve the Fiery Hua clan until death. Please, will he accept them? MC looked at him and said, "It looks like they've lost their minds after such a scolding. Why are they calling him boss?" He shouted that they're not even 30. "Please, he must take care of them, boss." The protagonist shouted in surprise, "What? Impossible. They're saying they're not even 30? He thought, unbelievable. After that, they set off on their journey, and inside the carriage, along with the protagonist, sat the others. MC looked at them, arms folded, and said he couldn't believe it. Did everyone here have mental problems from energy deviation? Nozak said that had never happened to them before. What exactly surprised him so? He replied, "It doesn't matter." Then he sighed and added that he couldn't understand how followers of the demonic arts could become warriors for impoverished orthodox clans. Was that even logical? The 21-year-old eldest brother said that his teacher had always told him that the path of the demonic arts is a way of life, the essence of a person, not some faction or affiliation. 18-year-old fourth brother agreed with him. There was nothing wrong with that, but realistically, what respectable family of a righteous school would accept practitioners of the demonic arts? The 20-year-old second brother shouted, "Who would dare say such a thing? They'd break their heads for him." The 19-year-old third brother shouted that they would tear him apart. The protagonist closed his eyes and thought, they were so naive, eager to fight. They reminded him of someone he had become very attached to. Then he sighed and said that if they wanted to serve under another house, they must be willing to put their lives on the line for any of his orders, whether they liked it or not. Their personal freedom meant nothing. They must obey like dogs for the sake of the clan's honor. Understood? They said yes. They will serve with all their hearts, boss. Then he waved his hand, and putting his hand to his head, said, "Oh my god, okay, they can do as they please. They are warriors of the Hua Fire clan now." In response, they shouted that they were grateful. "Boss." He told them to stop calling him boss and just call him young master. They shouted that they understood, young master. After some time, the carriage arrived at the right place. The protagonist went outside and said, "It's really luxurious here. Is this his home?" Yunsu walked forward and answered, "Yes, he should go inside." He replied, "Okay, then they'll go. Hey, he's there. He should open the gate." Then a subordinate approached Yunsu and asked, "Master, what's going on here?" He held out his hand and told him not to ask and to cook in the outbuilding quickly. The protagonist walked forward and told him to forget it. What are they even doing here? They need to check his treasury first. He replied, "Yes, this way." The brothers followed them, and the subordinates watched in fear. The protagonist, walking forward, looked around and thought, so this is how luxurious he lived on the money he cheated people out of. Then Sojin walked forward and asked, "What's wrong, brother? Trouble?" Yunsu ran up to him and shouted, "Brother, nothing. He should go back inside." He replied that he knew there was nothing to hide from him. So what should he say? These people. Before he could finish speaking, the protagonist folded his arms and said, he told him to leave. So why is he still sticking his nose where it doesn't belong, huh? Judging by his clothes, he must be one of that swindler's guests. Guests shouldn't interfere in family affairs. But Sojin passed him by and said that he, the young man, had a very bad temper. Cholmuk asked, "Young master, will he allow him to deal with him?" And Yunsu pointed his hand at him and shouted, "No, this is a misunderstanding. They are his guests, brother. That's right, he must allow it. They are the four demons Zhongshan and the eldest son of the Firehua clan." He smiled and said, "No wonder he has such a sharp tongue. So he is that crazy eldest son of the Wa clan, a jerk from a righteous sect who makes mistakes with scum and bullies ordinary people. Funny. The MC said that if he was done having fun, he should leave. They had business to attend to. But Sojin added, he calls himself an orthodox, yet he hangs around with demonic arts practitioners. He's terrorizing ordinary people. His grandfather must be crying in his grave, you worthless scum. The next second, Yeonsu shouted, this, and Sojin reached for his sword and told him not to worry, brother. He, Sojin, wasn't the kind of pathetic swordsman who would lose to such scum. Yeonsu smiled, looking at him, and thought, really? The next second, Nosek grabbed his weapon and said he'd had enough. He should let him smash that jerk's jaw. He stepped forward and shouted, young master, he asks for permission. But the protagonist reached for the weapon behind him and said, leave it alone, he'll do it himself. He then pushed off the ground and leaping forward said, so the dog can protect his master after all. He should come here, mutt. He beckoned his opponent with his finger. The next second, Sojin rushed to attack, pointing his sword forward, but the protagonist parried his attack with his sword, then swung and smiling said, swift sword style, but it lacks power. Sojin shouted in surprise, what? Then MC swung the weapon around himself, forcing Sojin to duck. And then he added another blow, and Sojin noticed cracks in the sword he had extended to block his attack. He shouted, his sword? The brothers watching said, it's over. Aha. As soon as he began to retreat under his onslaught, there was no turning back. Nosek added, just by looking, he sees that his sword is stronger than his iron club, so it will break soon. Yeonsu asked in surprise, what? And the next second, the protagonist swung his weapon, throwing away part of the enemy's destroyed sword. His eyes blazed with excitement as he delivered another blow, knocking Sojin far back. Dongjok folded his arms and said, as expected. Then the MC said, hey, he should throw him his iron club. Nosek shouted, yes, young master. After that, the protagonist caught the club and asked, what did he say? That his grandfather was crying in the coffin? His eyes continued to blaze with rage and a mad grin adorned his face. He said, great. In that case, he'll make sure he hears his scream from the grave right next to him. Sojin looked up at him, frightened, and asked him to wait. Then screams erupted around the protagonist, and he shouted, he has to let go of his hand, you idiot. The bone will crack. Oh yeah, that's right. What difference does it make if the guy who's going to be buried with his grandfather breaks a few bones? He laughed maniacally, and then one of the brothers said that he definitely knew how to deal with the enemy. Dongjok asked, is that guy going to die soon? Then Yeonsu ran towards the protagonist in fear and shouted, oh my god, young master, he'll pay for his life too. He's begging him to spare him. The protagonist stopped and asked, what? Really? He shouted that he was involved with demonic practitioners from the heaven illuminated by war organization. He can't let such a person die in his house. He'll pay whatever he asks. He just has to spare his life. The protagonist asked, is that so? And he'd almost thought he was pinning his hopes on this idiot. He smiled and added that he should have said so right away. Yeonsu thought he was nuts. After a while, everyone entered the building, and the protagonist said, he sees he's really saved up a lot of money. Okay, they should start counting the debts. First, for the lives of these four, he must pay 500 gold bars each. Yeonsu thought, didn't he just say he'd take them into his clan as warriors? So why should he pay for them? MC added, secondly, the payment for his intact limbs, 200 gold bars. Plus his life will cost 300 gold bars. As for his talkative brother, who is currently lying in the yard, his life will cost him 1,000 gold bars. And finally, for the psychological damage caused and then the physical energy he spent today, he must pay 3,000 gold bars. Then he raised his index finger and added, and to make the calculation easier, he should just give everything he has. What did he think? Any objections? In response, Yeonsu, with tears in his eyes, said that he completely agreed with him. He thought this idiot would be worse than any gang of bandits. After some time, the brothers started carrying chests of gold, and the protagonist told them to take everything out. They replied, yes, there is. Then the protagonist looked at the screen standing to the side in surprise. He frowned, looking at it, and thought, what kind of screen is this? It gave off a strange energy. Then he thoughtfully said, maybe he was just imagining things. At that moment, Yeonsu approached him and asked if he liked the screen. He replied, no, not really. Yeonsu said as expected, he has sharp eyes. This screen is the work of the creator Jang Seo-sun. He was just bothered by the fact that his room was too empty. He should take it for himself. MC looked at him and smiling asked, can he really take it? Well, he won't refuse. He thought, damn cheapskate. After some time, the carriage was filled with jewelry and things. The protagonist pointed at it with his hand and, looking at Yeonsu, asked, he won't need this carriage anymore, right? Since he won't be traveling around the country anymore, so he'll take it. Okay? He bowed and said, of course, knowing that he'll put it to good use is an honor for him. Then the MC shouted, well then, let's get going. He got into the carriage and they set off. Watching them go, Yeonsu bowed and wished them a safe journey. The protagonist shouted for him to live a righteous life. They'll see each other next time. Yeonsu extended his trembling hand forward and thought, they'll see each other next time? Isn't it enough that he's already robbed him blind? Is he even human? Why are the heavens so merciless? What did he do that they'd send this madman after him? After a while, Yeonwa Sect Masok looked ahead and said in surprise, no. What the hell is this? He noticed the demon brothers carrying boxes of gold. He shouted in surprise, what the hell is going on? Young master, where did he get all this money? Really? Before he could finish speaking, the protagonist sighed and folding his arms across his chest said, no way. He himself said that they don't have much money, so he should keep it well. Anyway, they'll leave it. Better tell him, Masok, how much will he give these guys? He replied that he didn't even know. They had strong bodies and they looked unusual, but no matter how you look at it, they were probably well over 40. And the MC smiled and said that he would say something about it. He thought they would be happy. Then he asked, but where is Manager Du and Elder Cho? He came home and they were nowhere to be seen. He replied that he completely forgot. Some very important guests had arrived, so they were entertaining them in the reception hall. They told him to bring him there when he returned. The protagonist frowned and asked in surprise, what? More guests had shown up? Had more charlatans shown up again? He shouted that it was not so. This time, guests must not be beaten. He must go quickly. The protagonist was indignant, wondering what those old men had done this time. After a while, one of the people present announced that the young master had arrived. Huangbon looked at him happily, and Baekshun said, he is here, young master. He then looked at those present and added, young master, he will introduce their guests. These were the three heads of the merchant groups who had generously supported their clan during their difficult times. Then the head of the Graceful Winds Merchant Guild, Poon Kwano, bowed and said that he had heard that the sleeping dragon had awakened. Now he could see with his own eyes that the rumors were true. Next, he introduced himself. Then the head of the Warriors Domain Trading Company, Don Guanyo, smiled and introduced himself, saying that he saw his healthy face. After enduring so many hardships, he was free of all worries. Next, the head of the Golden Land Estate, Wang Yichun, said he was sorry it had taken him so long to meet. He then introduced himself as well. After this, MC cracked his knuckles and said he had heard a lot about them. He also introduced himself and thanked them for their visit. After that, they began a heated discussion. After some time, the protagonist picked up a teapot and asked, are the three of them here to collect their debts? Kwano raised his hand and said that they hadn't come to pressure them, demanding a slow return of their money. They had simply learned that the young master had opened his eyes and had come to congratulate him on it. They apologized for any inconvenience. The protagonist replied that, first of all, he would like to thank the three of them for their previously mentioned selfless assistance. But he preferred a final, definitive accounting. However, he had only recently taken over the clan, so he was still poorly informed about the current state of his holdings. Therefore, he asked for their understanding. Secondly, he wanted to know the total debt their clan owed to their trading groups. Baekshun, surprised, said, young master, and he gestured with his hand, saying that he needed to know the exact amount before they discussed the repayment schedule. Yochun then said what was to be expected from young master Hua. He spoke the truth. In that case, although he felt embarrassed to say it, he should allow them to name approximate amounts. Kwano said that he owed the Graceful Winds Trading Guild 5,300 nyang. Yochun said that the debt to the Golden Land Estate was 3,200 nyang. Guanyo added, and he needs to return 1,900 nyang to the Warriors Domain Trading Company. MC said, bringing the total to 10,400 nyang. A moment later, one of the guests said, since they've brought up the subject, he should add that they've actually been under pressure from the Chunghwa Trading Guild for a long time. Baekshun rose from his seat in surprise, and the protagonist said, the Chunghwa Trading Guild. Kwano said he didn't want the Yumhwa sect bonds they held. It was clear it would harm his clan, so they firmly rejected their offers. Yochun added, however, after the duel, the Chunghwa Trading Guild began to use its enormous financial power to put pressure on them with all its might. They monopolized all their essential trading goods, and also cut off their contacts with other trading groups with whom they did business. Moreover, they openly stole their branch managers. Wanban shouted in surprise, how could anyone do such a thing? Then Yochun placed his hand on the table and said he was ashamed to admit it, but they could no longer bear this kind of pressure. Before they gave up their rights to collect the debt, they felt they should warn him of this. After this, the MC bowed and said they were deeply grateful for their generosity. Thinking about what they had gone through, his heart ached. All those people who had joined the clan during its heyday were gone, leaving only Elder Cho and Manager Do, and the three of them continued to protect the clan. Then he rose from his seat and leaning his hand on the table added, so, although he's not very good at science, he knows one thing for sure. All debts associated with the emergence of goodwill must be repaid. The entire amount his clan owes will be paid immediately. Then one of the guests shouted in surprise, is that possible? The protagonist added that, as interest on their assistance so far, he would help them escape the clutches of the Chunghwa Merchant Guild. The guests looked at him in surprise, and then Kwano sighed and said, young Master Mujin, does that mean he's willing to do everything he can for them? He replied that it was true. Baekshun then shouted in surprise, young master, what is he saying now? He knows who's behind those idiots. It's the Gundun sect, one of the most powerful sects in Jianghu. The protagonist looked at him and scratching his ear asked, so those pompous idiots supported them? He shouted in surprise, young master. Then Yochun raised his hand and said, Master Do, he needn't worry. If their debts are cleared, there's nothing they can do. That alone will be a tremendous blessing for them. They had no intention of causing conflict between the Yumhwa sect and the Gundun sect. However, the rumor that the sleeping dragon had awakened was indeed true, and they were grateful for his words alone. Now their hearts are at peace. After a while, everyone went outside, and Yo-chun added, then they'll be going. They wished prosperity to their clan. The protagonist responded by wishing them safety on their journey. Then he said, Shonghua Merchant Guild, Governor Do, he must gather information on these rats. He needs to know everything from their finances, their regions of operation, their main trade goods, right down to their connections with the Gundam sect. Baekhyun looked at him in surprise and shouted, Young Master Mujin? He must wait. Is he seriously going to do what he said earlier? The protagonist looked at him and asked, did he really think he was joking? How many times must I repeat this? Kindness must be properly repaid, and the debt for the insults must be fully repaid. Hadn't he heard what those idiots did to them? If they let this slide, the next time they'd be the ones to grab them by the lapels. They should risk everything and take another look at this situation. If repaying their debt was all they got for supporting their clan for decades, then they wouldn't help them anymore in the future. So shouldn't they at least repay them in full for their help? Even if his words sounded like the absurd bravado of a madman. After that, he thought they'd see who would win. Cholmuk approached them next, calling the protagonist over and saying that all the tasks he'd given them had been completed. He looked at him and said, well, good work. Now they should gather here. They should introduce themselves. These two are the elder and the manager of their clan. Baekhyun was surprised. Young sir, who are these? Before he could finish speaking, MC said he would introduce them. New warriors had joined their clan today, men renowned throughout Zhongshan. Before them were the famed brothers of the Middle Mountains, or the four demons of Zhongshan. Cholmuk then flexed his fist and shouted, please, they must take care of them. The protagonist then smiled and, raising his index finger, added, it's too early for them to be surprised. An even more shocking detail. They were all younger than him. The men shouted in bewilderment. What? Baekhyun thought. That can't be right. Then Nosak looked at his brother and said, he's starving. Maybe they should roast some meat, he asked. Why do they look so stunned? He replied. It's obvious they were impressed by their fortitude. Baekhyun then shouted, young master, doesn't he know about the four demons' notoriety? Why did he accept them into their clan without consulting them? The protagonist asked in response, did they consult with him when they were planning to run away with the children? Baekhyun shouted in surprise. That's it. The protagonist looked at him seriously and added, if he approves of someone, they stay. If not, he's out of here. They mustn't forget, he's the one who will be the next head of the Kwan. Musok, he needs to go buy a cow. He said, that's it. Before he could finish, Baekhyun said, young master, they have no money after all. He remembers that just a few minutes earlier, they paid off a debt of 10,000 gold. After a while, he brought the steward and the elder into the room with the gold. Baekhyun shouted in surprise, is that all? And MC said, do they know that swindler made a tidy fortune? Then Huangban looked at him and shouted, young master, really? And he shook his head and told him to calm down. He didn't kill him. He just took what was rightfully his. Then, Baekhyun asked what kind of screen it was. He replied that he said it was one of Master Seosan's works, and gave it to him. Baekhyun shouted that name in surprise, and the protagonist said that he thought that even if they sold the screen at the lowest price, it would bring them 90 gold. So he took it with him. He said, wow, it really looks like the original. The protagonist asked what they thought. This should be enough to buy meat. He replied, quite enough. He said, then stop chatting here. They should go quickly and get the meat. After that, the door to the room closed, and the screen was covered in energy. It was the morning of the next day. Everyone had gathered at the training grounds, and the MC said that he thought they were all curious about why he had gathered everyone so early. After everything that had happened recently, he realized they all needed specialized training. The foundation of swordsmanship is a strong body. No matter how well they mastered the art of fencing, it's useless if their bodies are weak. Therefore, starting today, they will begin a course of specialized physical training under his personal supervision. He hopes that everyone will keep up with him and no one will lag behind. At their feet lies a 144-kilogram sack of rice. It will be a reliable assistant, which will aid them in their further training. He will also clarify that this rice is not for eating. If he catches anyone eating it, they will die. Do they understand? After all, he knows that there will always be someone who wants to fill their belly. After this, Dojin looked at his sister and noticed that their sacks looked significantly smaller, as if they weighed at most 15 kilograms. Then the warrior asked, so what will they do? The protagonist smiled and ordered him to lift the sack onto his shoulders. He shouted in surprise, what? The guy standing next to him laughed slightly and said, young Master Mujin, it would take at least 2 men to lift a bag like that. The protagonist told him to shut his mouth and pick up the bag, unless he wanted him to slice him with his sword. Although his sword wasn't sharp enough to make a clean cut, if he struck him with it, all his ribs would definitely be shattered. They had to choose between picking up the bag or fighting him. The next second, the demonic brothers began picking up bags, and MC approached their elder and asked, are they kidding? Practitioners of the demonic arts shouldn't disgrace this movement with their appearance. Let each of them lift 3 bags. If he doesn't want to, he must fight him. Cholmuk began to tremble, clenched his teeth, and then picked up several more bags. Watching what was happening, Baekhyun wondered, what is this? Huangban was also perplexed by what the young master was doing. Meanwhile, the training continued, and the protagonist shouted, excellent. When he decided to lift the bag, did it suddenly become within his power? Could he do it? They had to get that pitiful thought out of their heads. If he failed, only death awaited him. At this rate, was there anything that couldn't be done? Excellent. Now they begin to squat. Stand up. 200 repetitions. Everyone. They must keep up with him. 1, 2. Everyone repeated after him, and then he shouted, now stand up. They must tense their bodies and stand up to their full height. Lazy bones. One more time. Unless of course they all had a death wish. At that moment, Cholmuk wondered what this feeling was. It felt as if his entire body, from his feet up, was going limp. No, he couldn't. If he couldn't endure this, the young master might beat him to death. He let out a loud cry and made another lunge. While watching what was happening, Huangbon wondered what kind of training method this was. He was just watching. It was already hard for him. Could these tiny bodies even withstand something like this? At that moment, the protagonist shouted, they call themselves warriors, but all they've done is stuff themselves at the expense of their clan. And now, they're whining after such insignificant training? Such people don't deserve the slightest mercy. Any scoundrel who shows weakness will die here. They will continue. After a while, the guy sat down on shaking legs and said, 200. And then he fell to the ground, exhausted. The protagonist said, you can't look at them all without tears. He can't believe they wasted the whole day on a simple warm-up. With such endurance, they still dare dream of martial arts. This is the end of today's training. In exchange, they will henceforth become one with this bag. They must eat, relieve themselves, and must not take it off while training or even sleeping. They will always carry a bag of rice with them. They will ask, how long will this last? Until he tells them to put it down. Hey there, Zhongshan. Cholmuk looked up at him and shouted, yes. The protagonist ordered a rope to be brought and tied to each of their bags. Whoever removes their rope will have their lifelines significantly shortened. They must remember. He thought that he had never seen her, but today he really wanted to meet her mother. At that moment, MC walked past Masak and told him to make sure the children ate beef at every meal. He replied, yes. Should he prepare a bath for him? He waved his hand and replied, no, he'll call him later. Afterwards, he entered the building, closed the door behind him, and collapsed onto his bed. That night, everyone gathered in the dining room, still clutching the bags to their bodies. Nosak held his chopsticks with trembling hands and, looking ahead, asked, isn't that strange? He was exercising his legs, but his hands were shaking. Changtae looked at him and asked, is it the same with him? He had noticed the same effect before and thought it was a bit unusual. He added that even when he trained with the master, nothing like this had ever happened. He agreed with him. The next day, the torture. No, the training continued. The protagonist shouted, 42, 43, hey, in the third row, him. Yes, him, the bastard. He wanted to die? Why isn't he doing his push-ups properly? He still has 120 reps left. He needs to focus. Did he hear him? At that moment, the warrior thought that they were actually following all his orders. What kind of monsters were these? And the next day after that, the MC shouted again, they will become ducks. They must repeat after him. Then he started quacking, and the others repeated after him. Dongjok wondered in surprise. What the hell is going on? And the next day again, they continued lifting bags, and the protagonist shouted at them to lift it up faster. Or maybe they want to train all day again? If anyone does the exercise slower than him, they'll get another bag tied to them. The kids raised their bags and shouted, 50. And the MC, his whole body tensing, looked away and thought that these brats were doing better than he thought. Should he increase the difficulty a little? After a while, they came to a cliff, and Cholmuk said, this is the place, young master, really. The protagonist turned his gaze to him and, smiling, said, that's right. He thinks they were really hot, so it's time to cool off a bit. They'll swim across this river. Then Soyeon smiled and said, wow, a waterfall. That water must be refreshing. Dojin called out to her in surprise, and then she asked, exactly, what should we do with him? He can't swim. Shouldn't he tell his older brother that he's a terrible swimmer? After that, Wangbon shouted, young master, there's no way to swim across these raging waters. The current is too strong. Baeksin added, this place is notorious for the river taking lives. Even without weights, trying to swim here is extremely dangerous. MC looked at them and said, geez, these old men are worrying too much. They shouldn't worry. He checked everything personally. Baeksin asked when he trained like this, and he said, hey, they all need to listen to him. They must choose, swim across the river or fight him one-on-one in a duel. They must choose wisely. After that, he abruptly jumped down and said that he would go and take the plunge first. After that, Nosak looked at his elder brother and asked, what should they do? He gritted his teeth and replied, the chances of surviving crossing the river are higher than in a duel with the young master elder brother, so he will jump into the depths of the water too. He jumped down, followed by his brother, who said he'd do the same in that case. The others followed suit, screaming, damn it, they all have to jump down. It's a matter of life and death. Meanwhile, the boy began to tremble with fear, walked to the edge and said, damn it. Everyone started swimming. Dongjok stood behind him and said, if he can't do it, then he should step aside. Then Soyeon ran to the cliff, smiled, and waved her hand. She yelled at him not to worry. His older brother would hardly beat him to death, and she would jump too. Her brother anxiously yelled at her to wait. He clenched his fists and thought, I could never tell him that. He was also a warrior of the Yomwa sect. After that, he resolutely ran forward and, jumping down, thought that it was a piece of cake for him. He sank underwater, and Huangbon shouted, young master Dojin? Meanwhile, the protagonist swam ahead and shouted, if they fall, they'll really die. They must keep moving their arms and legs. At that moment, Dojin tried to swim and thought, he can do it. He could do it. He extended his hand forward and thought he could overcome this. But then his head sank underwater, and he began to drown, thinking he too can cross the river. Seeing that he was being carried away by the current, The man cursed and warned everyone about it. He was being carried towards the waterfall. Dojin surfaced, greedily gulping air, and Chante shouted that he was swimming towards him. Dojin was already out of breath. Fortunately, Chante caught him. He lifted him up and told him to breathe. When he gave the signal, let him take a deep breath and hold on tightly to his hand. It was too late to turn back, so they went ahead. He told him to get ready. He was a little confused and, at his direction, took a deep breath, and then they fell down the waterfall together. Seeing this, the men on the cliff looked worriedly into the thick of the water. Fortunately, everything was fine. The boy crawled to the shore and Changtai said that he did well. Dojin thanked him for saving him and he told him that it was his duty. MC approached them and asked the boy, "Is he okay? Is he hurt anywhere?" He replied that he was perfectly fine. Luckily, the warrior had come to his aid. Changtai was surprised, not understanding when he had managed to catch up with them, and Mujin told the boy not to overexert himself. Doing everything together was of course good. But if something happened to him, all of this would become meaningless. He looked at him confidently and said that they couldn't remain children forever. He would stay with everyone until the very end. Only then could he become a true warrior of the Yomwa sect. Changtai praised him for such magnificent words, and the two at the top breathed a sigh of relief. After that, they continued. This time they had to climb up a steep cliff. MC shouted at them that if they fell, they would not be able to pick up their bones, and that they should climb back up with all their strength. The warrior began to curse him in his thoughts. He shouldn't have followed him. Because of this, he became distracted. His foot slipped from the ledge, and he fell off the cliff. As he fell, he screamed in fear, stretched out his arms to grab onto anything, and caught the rope holding Dongjok's bag. He felt the extra weight and turned around indignantly, and the boy tearfully asked him for help. He clenched his teeth and cursed, then told him not to dare pass out, to grab the rock in front of him. After that, they began running under the scorching sun. Mujin said that if anyone fell behind, they would have to pick them up and continue running. A child they passed looked at the exhausted boy and asked his mother, "Are these people sentenced to death?" She answered him that they were warriors of the Yomwa sect, which makes the whole picture even stranger. The siblings were also quite tired. Suddenly, Soyeon collapsed to the ground and her brother called out to her worriedly. After that, Elder Cho ran up to her and asked if she was okay. She looked exhausted and asked him to carry her on his back for a little while. She would quickly recover. He sat her on his back without asking questions, and she gave her brother a thumbs up with a grin. It turned out she wasn't tired at all, but had cheated. Seeing this, the other warriors stopped, and MC asked what they were doing there. If they intended to faint, imitating the little girl, then he wouldn't stop them, but they would have to put their lives on the line. They weren't going to run, they had no choice but to continue on their way, envying that girl. Soon they reached their destination, and immediately sat down on the floor to catch their breath. While the boy was trying to come to his senses, Dongjok approached him and said that he was constantly lagging behind during training and couldn't even support the weight of his own bag of rice. How long was he going to drag behind? How long should he have to suffer because of him? If he couldn't handle the strain, then he should just crawl away. Let him not create problems for others. He looked down and the boy asked if he was even listening to him. He replied that he had said he would kill them. Did he think he was doing this because he wanted to? He had long wanted to quit this job as a warrior, but how could he tell the young master this? This angered Dongjok even more, and he asked, so he was afraid of being beaten to death if he brought this up? That was why he fell over every time like a rotting corpse. From what he saw, he drew one conclusion. He was not cut out for the life of a warrior, so he would immediately cut his vital artery. The boy backed away from him in fear and exclaimed, "Why is he acting like this?" The warrior grabbed Dongjok by the shoulder and told him to stop. Not everyone can be as steadfast as he is. He clenched his fist tighter and hit him in the chest, exclaiming that in that case, they might not live as warriors. The warrior fell from the blow, and he ordered him to get up so he could kill him. He was about to strike him, but Cholmuk stopped him, saying that a younger master, even bigger than them, had walked on the edge of a blade. And although everyone accepts what they are given differently, all these actions are not as meaningless as he thinks. Therefore, first, let him surpass the younger master, and then make such statements. Dongjok retreated, and finally told the boy that if a situation arose again in which he found himself at a disadvantage because of him, he should know that he would die by his hand before by the younger masters. Soon the moon rose in the sky. Dongjok left the building, cursing the restroom for being so far away, and he heard something cutting through the air, and wondered who was there at this time of day. He hid behind the bushes near the training ground and saw Mujin practicing sword swings and lunges. What he did surprised him greatly. MC moved dexterously and quickly, and he thought that he wasn't just moving fast. His every movement was filled with incredible power and was distinguished by special mobility. And yet, their age difference was so insignificant. How did he already manage to master such honed swordsmanship? Is this what they call talent in martial arts? Mujin stopped, caught his breath, and turned his gaze to the bushes, asking who was there. Let him come out before he cracked his skull. Dongjok awkwardly emerged from hiding and asked what he was doing there, hiding behind the bush. He told him that he was just going to the restroom and stopped there. He hadn't been peeping at them on purpose. MC said it was okay. He was bored anyway, so he showed up at just the right time. Tell him to put the bag of rice aside and pick up that sword over there. He immediately excitedly threw the weight off his back and picked up the weapon, looking at it uncertainly. MC told him to attack, and he took off, and their blades collided with a loud clang. Dongjok put effort into each strike, while Mujin moved easily. Dongjok was confused and thought that he knew his attacks wouldn't work, but still, what the hell was going on? Had he ever wielded a sword that fast before? MC parried his next strike and chuckled, saying that now he might be of some use. But isn't he looking ahead too much? He jumped behind him and delivered a blow that made him lose his balance and fall. But then he quickly rose up on his hands and increased the distance between them. He caught his breath and said that it was expected. And Mujin noted with a smile that before, one blow from him would have already knocked him out. Finally, his endurance was becoming more or less bearable. Dongjok focused on the sensation in his back and thought that although the blow was strong, it was not enough to knock him out. The MC decided to end it there. He said goodbye to him, telling him to rest well, and he bowed, wishing him the same in return. After that, he looked at his sword in surprise and wondered, is this really working? The next day, they had abdominal training. Mujin told everyone to lift a bag of rice between their legs and hold it while hanging from a bar. They started the exercise, which was difficult for Dongjok, as the bag kept trying to fall, but he caught it immediately and squeezed it tighter between his legs. The warriors remarked that they were truly magnificent. They continued doing the exercise, clutching the bag of rice between their legs. They looked more inspired than before. After this run, they went out into the city and ran through the streets. And at one point the guy lost all his strength, noticing how everything was blurring before his eyes. He thought that he couldn't faint here. Dongjok noticed his suffering and, holding his bag, told him to hold on. There wasn't much left. Looking at them, the MC smiled, and so a month flew by at this pace. Mujin gathered everyone to finally announce the completion of the special training. He allowed everyone to untie the ropes and remove the load from their shoulders, to which they were incredibly happy. MC said he was sorry to spoil their mood, but they would be holding this kind of training every year during the summer and winter seasons. The next special training would take place this winter in just a few months, and to console them a little, he would say that the planned training would be easier than this one, because they already have some experience, and this so-called experience is of great value. In short, the training ends here, but let them not forget that a strong body turns into a mighty sword. Do they understand? They answered him in unison, and he, taking up the sword, said that right now he would fight everyone one-on-one to raise their experience to the next level. The one whose name he calls, let him take any weapon he wants and step forward. Their joy did not last long. Everyone was beaten and knocked out, and it was an endless cycle of testing endurance that seemed like an eternity. All these difficulties turn into experience, and experience brings new changes. Thus, the bandits who were once called the Four Demons of Zhongshan now became the new martial arts instructors of the Manhwa sect. And so, with quiet but swift steps, the Manhwa sect began to regain its former glory when it shone brightly throughout Seochang. Dojin trained diligently. He struck his teacher, Nosak, and he praised him, telling him to try turning his supporting foot at the moment of impact so he could deliver a powerful blow. Baekshun and Huangbon stood nearby, watching him with smiles. Baekshun said that it seemed the young master had regained his former passion. Huangbon agreed and said he was so glad. He hadn't seen such an expression on his face in a long time. Who would have thought he would get along so well with the Four Demons of Zhongshan? Baekshun said that his observation was correct. But most importantly, young Master Mujin has regained his sanity and has put the sect back on its feet. Things are going so well that it even frightens him a little. The elder agreed with him, because sometimes he feels like his madness has flared up again, but now he wonders if he will finally emerge from the vault today. Meanwhile, MC was in the forbidden storage room. He was meditating and opened his eyes, thinking, it's already the 4th day, right? As he thought, this is no ordinary screen. The more he pours his internal energy, the more powerfully it resists, with even greater force. He challenged this screen, saying that they will soon know who will win. Suddenly, he noticed something, which made his eyes widen, and he immediately ran to the screen and screamed, and then carefully pressed the button on it. A bottle of green liquid fell out of the secret drawer. He took it, and covering his nose from the terrible stench, thought that it was so strange. Why was it necessary to install such a complex device inside the screen for this vial? Now he understands why it seemed to him that some strange poisonous energy was emanating from the screen. That was the reason. Not only the vial fell out of the screen, but also a notebook. He picked it up and read the title, Destructive Spiritual Sword Art. He immediately realized that this was what they were trying to hide, and quickly flipped through the notebook, deciding to read it all. Time passed, and it was already morning. He had just finished reading and sighed heavily, saying that he had high hopes for this. But at this level, comparisons can only be made with the 10 great martial arts of Hubei province, right? It wasn't a waste of time. But looking at the method of using this art and its cultivation, unlike him, who uses martial arts based on external moving energy, this technique is more suitable for the members of the Manhwa sect. The reason he couldn't teach those impudent little ones swordsmanship lay in the existing differences between their basic cultivation methods. The foundation of the 9 Swords Solo is external moving energy, while the foundation of the Manhwa sect is martial arts based on internal yang energy. These two energies are inherently contradictory, so mixing them recklessly can cause an energetic imbalance. That's why Nine Swords Solo should only be taught to absolute beginners who don't belong to any sect. So he thinks it could be called luck that the energy core of this body was destroyed. And since this vessel was in a perfect state of nothingness, he was able to master the external energy of movement without any problem. And so he decided that from now on, this would become the martial art of the Manhwa sect. After that, he went to the elders and told them that he had accidentally found this manual and thought it was a pretty good martial art. Upon seeing this notebook, they were both very surprised, and Huangban exclaimed, "Is this really the original text of the art of the destructive spiritual sword, which was lost more than 10 years ago? This is a truly advanced swordsmanship art. Was it really hidden in that screen?" Mujin told him that he was sure the former owner of the screen had no idea what was hidden inside. The elder excitedly asked, was he really going to teach this technique to their warriors? He replied that in any case, they didn't have any swordsmanship, so this would be a good base. Starting tomorrow, he will personally take charge of training the warriors, but he doesn't think that those four will learn this art. Anyway, he was going to bed. If the two of them were also going to learn this art, then let them make copies first. They both started jumping up and down in joy and squealing, and he thought they had been yelling like that since early morning. But Manager Do and Elder Cho weren't the only ones dancing with joy. The warriors were also delighted, like fish that had finally found water. Despite being part of a sect like Manhwa, there was no martial art here that could be called true. The high-level swordsmanship technique of the destructive spiritual sword art made them bond even more closely together. The same was true for Dojin and Soyeon, who were studying the secret martial arts of the Manhwa sect. As expected, the four demons of Zhongshan were honing only their own martial arts. They had long ago begun intensive training in their own way, and even without mastering the destructive spiritual sword art, they had more than enough ability to rise to the rank of martial artists. Although he didn't know how long it would take, he walked out onto the training ground and thought that another month had passed, and after they moved on to martial arts training, they had never looked happier. Especially those two children. It makes sense, because they feel their growth day by day. And from the perspective of martial artists, their talent defies description. They are quite cute. But why was there no one at the training grounds? Masok approached him and greeted him, and he asked where everyone had gone. He asked in surprise, didn't he know? Today was the one-on-one fighting tournament called Little Dragon Ascension. He didn't understand what he was talking about, and deciding that his memory was failing him again, he explained that it was the largest event in Seochang, held once every 5 years. If you win, you gain the right to participate in the Orthodox Jianghu Forces Warriors tournament. Had he really not heard of that? He immediately jumped onto the rooftops, and ran to the tournament venue, exclaiming that if something like this was happening, they should have told him first. These old people always try to enjoy all the good shows alone. Meanwhile, the siblings, along with Elder Cho and Manager Do, were standing in line. He told them that their turn had come, and that they should have written their names on the list of disciples. They were overjoyed, and the Baek clan's chief administrator, Jang Seun, approached them and asked if these were the children of the Manhwa sect. Since they didn't show their faces at the martial arts tournaments in Seochang, he didn't expect to see them here. He accompanied Baek Sion. Huangban greeted him, and said that it had been a long time since their last meeting. Their sect's business was poor, so they couldn't pay attention to such events. He said with a grin that the news about the Manhwa sect's situation was as old as time. However, it seemed like their life had gotten a little better recently. He couldn't believe they were even able to pay the entry fee for the Little Dragon Ascension tournament. After spending so much, did they have enough money left to buy anything edible for dinner? They also paid the membership fees for 10 years that were overdue, right? Are they trying to outdo themselves by dragging their young masters here when they themselves are on the verge of starvation? They both glared at him. While the MC climbed onto the roof of the tallest building, he looked around and realized he should have asked Masok where this tournament was being held before leaving. He continued searching, while a man and woman in green clothes were walking down the street. Everyone fell in love with her at the sight of her. There was no other way. Her name is Haya. She lifted her hat and looked around, asking, "Is this Seochan?" It was quite crowded. Mujin pushed her and told her not to chat in the middle of the road and to move to the side of the road, then looked around and asked irritably, "Where is this tournament being held? He can't find the right place." The woman was indignant at his behavior, and he turned to her, asking if she knows the location of the Little Dragon Ascension tournament. She ignored the question and glared at him menacingly, which made him confused, and then her grandfather, Sumoon, approached him and said that they also just arrived here and got lost looking for this place. If he finds the location of the tournament first, could he please show it to them? He frowned, and after a short pause asked why on earth he should do that. Doesn't he have legs of his own? Let them look for it themselves. He ran forward down the street, pushing everyone in his way, and Haya asked in confusion what's wrong with him. She had never seen such a rude person before. He chuckled and said that it was not just about appearance. His behavior and actions were an exact copy of him. It seemed that his madness had completely passed. She looked at her grandfather in surprise and asked if this was really who she thought it was. He smiled and said that it was Hua Jutai's grandson from the Yomwa sect, Hua Mujin. It was good that he came here in person. A powerful storm was about to sweep through Seochang. Meanwhile, the situation between the two clans had become tense, causing the townspeople to worry that they would start a fight. Huang Ban clenched his fists, restraining his anger, and said that young Master Mujin had recently recovered, and the situation of their sect was improving. The overdue membership fees would be paid soon. He should not worry about that. Siyun asked, were they going to pay the bills? But when? In 10 years? In any case, he was pleased to hear it. The fact that the children are participating in the tournament means they have inherited the secret arts, right? He guesses they no longer follow their ancestors' rule of only passing on the secret arts to the eldest son. He just said that young Master Mujin has recovered from his madness, but it seems they are in too much of a hurry to return everything to normal. He laughed loudly and mockingly said that he looks forward to seeing this incredible red flame martial art again. The elder became impatient and placed his hand on the hilt of his sword, and he asked what he was going to do. Did he want to draw his sword? He replied that they were in front of the children, so he asked him to refrain from further conversation, because his patience also had its limits. Siyun reached for his sword and said that it seemed that even in such a dire situation, he still had some pride. Then let him draw his sword. The atmosphere around them became heavy. The townspeople became nervous, but Mujin arrived just in time, approached them and told them to stop. Tonight, the children will take part in one-on-one duels. This is not a place where adults have the right to interfere. Today's main characters are the hope of Seochang. In other words, the children. The man smirked and asked, isn't this the famous crazy young master? He has heard of him. What brings him here? He ignored him and approached the children, asking why they didn't tell him a word about this event. They should have warned him about something like this. Dojin was confused, and Soyan said that they were going to win and surprise him. He patted her on the head and said that they, the brats, are simply incredible. He turned to the man and said that the martial arts clan should be proud of their mastery in martial arts. If they constantly boast about their wealth, people will call them third-rate. A martial artist should trust his sword. But why would anyone put gold above all else? He was indignant, and Sumoon, who had just approached them, laughed and remarked that he definitely knew how to speak his mind. He found it so refreshing. He turned to Siyun and suggested that he put his sword away, since today was a special day. He asked if he was from the Yomwa sect. He should mind his own business and go where he was going. Haya indignantly called him insolent, and he returned to Mujin and said that for a military clan, poverty is not something to be proud of. It seemed he came here to cheer for his juniors, but first he should buy them new clothes. Or maybe they just spent all their money on the entry fee. Wang Ban was about to tear him apart, but Sumoon intervened and asked, what's so important about clothes? Just because he's dressed richly doesn't mean he's become a martial artist. Siyun was angry that this old man kept interfering and turned away from them, saying there was no point in talking to those who didn't understand what they were trying to convey. Let them demonstrate their unrivaled skills during the fight. MC gave him a cold look, and Sumoon told him not to let something like that upset him. Wherever he goes, there will always be such individuals. He sighed heavily and said he was right, after which the old man glanced at Elder Cho with a smile, wondering why he seemed familiar. Or maybe he was just imagining things. A man ran up to them and asked if they were from the Yomwa sect. They confirmed it, and he told them to follow him. They had prepared their positions. He led them to a huge platform where the other participants had already gathered. The men set the table for them, and the siblings were delighted at the sight of such sumptuous dishes. Mujin smiled and told them not to overeat, since it was unknown when the duel would begin. The participants from the Baek clan went to their places in the tent for important guests, and Siyun gave Mujin an arrogant look, and he nervously clenched his teeth and thought that one day he should give that idiot a good beating. First, he would gouge out one of his eyes. His cruel thoughts were interrupted by Sumoon, who approached him and said that it seemed like there was no one there. Could he sit next to him? He wondered why this old man was hanging around them. He allowed him to sit, but it all seemed strange to him, and with a mental transmission he told everyone to put their food back, not to touch any tea or alcohol. They should not even think about eating until he began to eat. They obeyed him, and Haya, like a diligent granddaughter, filled Sumoon's cup. He asked Mujin why he wasn't drinking. Let him wet his throat too. He told him that he had just eaten, so he shouldn't pay attention to him. Finally, it all began. The tournament organizer came to the center and thanked everyone from the bottom of his heart for participating in the Rise of the Little Dragon tournament, which is held once every 5 years. He is Sok Ildo, the head of the Sok clan from Seochang. They have prepared simple snacks for them, so let them eat their fill and enjoy today's match. And then he noticed a person who made him nervous. He ran to Sumoon and asked what brought him to this event. He caught his breath and introduced himself, and Sumoon asked, so, did he recognize him? He asked in response, how could he not recognize the respected emperor of poisons Tang Sumoon? Upon hearing his name, The elders were greatly surprised, and he said that long ago he had the honor of seeing the Venerable One from afar. Hearing that the Poison Emperor was present, everyone ran to their table. In the Central Plains, only 4 people held the title of Emperor: the Sword Emperor of the Muden sect, the Fist Emperor of the Shaolin Monastery, the Whip Emperor of the Four Martial Heavens, and the Poison Emperor of the Tang clan. And then, one of the strongest martial artists in the Central Plains appeared at a small children's tournament held in Seochang. This couldn't help but cause a general commotion. Siyun stared at him in surprise and thought, "Is this old man the Poison Emperor? No, more importantly, why did he come here? He's in big trouble." Not knowing who he was, he acted extremely insolently. MC, meanwhile, poured himself a drink and thought that his name seemed familiar, and he remembered him. It was that kid. When the 10-year war with the Orthodox forces began, 4 of the 5 great clans, with the exception of the Namgung clan, refrained from participating in the fight against the divine demon. Their explanation was that there was no compelling reason to enter the war. But another reason was that the heads of these houses and their warriors were defeated by the divine demon. And on the day of that battle, a youth was also present on the battlefield. It was Tang Sumun of the Tang clan, the very same Poison Emperor that he is now. Meeting him brings back memories of that time. Ildo offered to escort him to the tent for important guests, but he declined, saying there was no need. He was much more interested in sitting here than there. The man was confused, not understanding what he meant, then looked around at everyone at the table and noticed with surprise that the young master from the Manhwa sect was also there. He apologized for not recognizing him. Would they all like to move to another table together? MC replied that his face wasn't a sign, so it wasn't surprising he didn't recognize him. These seats were perfectly fine with him, so he shouldn't worry about them. By the way, when will the matches start? The days are hot now, so he would like them to move faster. Sumun smiled and thought that the more he looked at him, the more he seemed to resemble him, his trusted friend and rival, who supported him in a moment of despair long ago, the Fire Emperor Wajute. Now he looked like his spitting image. Ildo laughed and noted that it was indeed very hot today. The tournament would start soon, so they would have to wait a bit. By the way, is he planning to participate himself? He didn't understand what he meant, and he explained to him that he was talking about the Tournament of Orthodox Forces, which is held once every 5 years. Its start would be announced soon, and it would be great if he decided to participate. He answered that he wasn't particularly interested in it now, and he said that it was a pity. Suddenly, an excited Siyun ran up to them, bowed to the Poison Emperor, and greeted him. If what happened earlier had offended him in any way, he sincerely apologized. He had no idea who stood before him. Sumun remained silent and took a sip of alcohol, then loudly placed the cup on the table and told his granddaughter that the surroundings were too noisy. When will the matches begin? She understood him, and respectfully thanked the men for coming to greet the Poison Emperor. However, her grandfather did not want any unnecessary fuss right now, so they should return to their business. Ildo said that in that case, they would begin the match right away. Mujin cast them a suspicious glance, after which the man stepped to the center of the arena and explained the rules. Only wooden weapons, such as wooden swords or spears, are allowed, which cannot cause death. The use of lethal blows is also prohibited. If the arena warden or official throws a blue bag into the arena, it means the match is temporarily suspended. A red bag means a loss, in which case the match must be stopped immediately. The Little Dragon Ascension Tournament begins. Baek Sayon of the Baek clan and Hwa Soyeon of the Yumwa sect are invited to the arena. The girl who was greedily eating meat froze, and the MC told her to consider this a chance to show what she had been working on all this time. He wants to see how much she has improved her skills. He confidently clenched her fists and agreed, then headed to the arena, while Sayon thought, so his opponent is this girl from the Yumwa sect. If she were to go against him in her very first match, luck had clearly turned against her. He will start by breaking both of her arms. He walked into the arena and looked at her proudly, and she flexed her fists and said that initially she was going to quickly win and go eat meat, but now she could not do that. He will be the first victim on Soyeon's valiant path of ascension. He protested, saying that he actually wanted to say that, and she told him to shut up. How long was he going to keep up this nonsense? He said irritably that she had started it. She better prepare herself. He wouldn't just break her arms. After listening to them, Mujin thought of Elder Cho and asked if they had always been on bad terms with those idiots. They never stopped trying to pick fights with them. He replied that when the Fire Emperor was still alive, it wasn't a big problem, but after the previous sect leader held the ceremony of transferring his powers to the heir, several vassals left the sect and sought refuge with the Baek clan. Manager Zhang is one of these defectors. The more their sect declined, the more hostile they became. MC said that of course, those traitors are real idiots. But still, why are they acting like this? He replied that it was because they had a serious conflict with the previous sect leader due to differences of opinion. Furthermore, since the Baek clan had accepted their vassals into their ranks, the number of their martial artists had increased. They skillfully exploited the hostility the vassals showed towards them. Meanwhile, Sayon took up his sword and rushed to attack. He lunged, Soyeon dodged and countered with a kick to his shoulder, after which she jumped, which he clearly did not expect, and kicked him in the nose with all her might. After such a blow, he fell, and, holding his bleeding nose, asked how she dared to hit him. She pointed her finger at him and laughed maliciously, noticing that his nose was bleeding. Sumoon was surprised that she used kicks and asked Mujin if he had taught her that. He replied that he hadn't had the chance because he was out of his mind. Elder Cho had taught her the basics. He nodded in confirmation, and Haya noted that it wasn't just about kicking technique. She was a pretty good fighter for her age. The way she moved dynamically and perfectly anticipated her opponent's strikes was an excellent foundation for her technique. However, the opponent was holding a wooden sword, so how long could she withstand an enemy with a weapon? Sayon, meanwhile, gripped the sword tighter in a rage and swore to kill her. He then swung the sword, and she ducked, avoiding the blow, before jumping to the side, dodging another swing. He continued swinging the sword, and she dodged. Haya said that her technique of dashing steps was impressive. She dodged all of his strikes. Siyun, meanwhile, was furious and worried about the boy, and he, meanwhile, called his opponent a slippery snake, to which she only smirked. He lunged, swung his sword, and when she dodged, she found herself pinned against the wall. Seeing this, Baekshun became worried, as she had nowhere to dodge. Wangbon called out to her and told her to get out of there quickly, and Siyun shouted at his boy to finish her off now. Let him not even think about showing her mercy. Sayon gathered all his strength and rushed to attack, but to everyone's surprise, the girl jumped, thereby dodging the attack. She landed behind him, and he asked. First she acted like a slippery snake, and now she was acting like a flying squirrel. She grinned and said that he was caught, and he became nervous, because he didn't understand where he went wrong. She raised her leg and said that so that he couldn't dodge, she would pin him against the wall and strike, but still, let him try to stop her with his slow wooden sword. After that, she swung her leg and delivered several quick blows to his head, and the old men supported her, shouting at her to smash his face, to make it so that he couldn't even crawl out of the arena. Siyun was already seething with rage. Meanwhile, the beaten boy called his opponent names and began to threaten her, but for her, this was empty words. She hit him again and said that his threats were meaningless. His sword broke and he was thrown to the edge of the arena, and his attendant excitedly called out to the referee and told him to throw the blue bag. His sword broke. The blue bag immediately fell into the arena, indicating that the fight was suspended. Soyeon was displeased, and her opponent laughed and asked how she had made such a miscalculation, breaking his sword. He stood up and with a smirk told her to remember, he was not finished with her yet. He would bring warriors and destroy their pathetic sect. She chuckled and said that once again all the problems come from his filthy mouth. He tells her to stop just because his sword broke during the duel? Who decided that? She is not going to stop. He became worried and said that the fact that the blue bag was thrown into the fight means that the duel is suspended. She took a threatening step towards him and asked what this has to do with her. Later, he can bring warriors or someone else with him, but now she will make a cutlet out of him. He became very nervous and covered in sweat, and then she jumped and Siyun was surprised. She kicked the boy in the head, knocking him to the floor, which made MC so happy that he jumped up from his seat and laughed out loud, exclaiming that it serves him right. Siyun indignantly called out to the referee and asked why the duel was continuing when the blue bag was thrown. The judge disqualified Soyeon for breaking the rules, and she headed back to her sect, and Hwangbon noted with a heavy sigh that this was how it all ended. Mujin praised his sister, and as she passed by Siyun, she noticed his furious glare and stuck her tongue out at him, mimicking Sayon. He literally flared with rage, and she returned to the table, and the elder excitedly asked if she hadn't heard that the fight stops when a blue bag is thrown into the arena. She started eating and told him that she knew about it, but beating up that idiot was more fun for her than winning. He couldn't argue with her, and the MC laughed until he cried and said that this was to be expected from his sister. He stood up and started waving his arms and legs, saying that it was magnificent. His sister was disqualified. But why was he so happy? Sumoon laughed at him, noting that he was apparently a good dancer. He exclaimed that he felt amazing, and the elder asked what kind of strange dancing this was. He started begging him to stop, and Soyeon asked what kind of tasteless behavior was this. Dojin bashfully asked him to maintain his dignity, and Mujin told them to let him go. He felt so good that he wanted to dance. What was wrong with that? After that, he filled the glasses and offered Sumoon a drink. Let him drink as much as he wanted today. He laughed and told him that he would gladly drink, which Haya didn't like. And then her grandfather turned to Soyeon and said that if she had used the sect's secret technique, her victory would have been even easier. Why didn't she do that? She asked in response. He wasn't serious, was he? She didn't see the need to use her sect's secret martial art on such a worthless person. He saw that he had suffered quite badly without it. If she had played all her trump cards, then in the future he could have figured out how to counter this. He laughed and remarked that she was absolutely right. Very smart of her. It was so sweet. He called out to the servant and asked him to bring more tinctures, and Soyeon pointed to her brother's plate and asked, "Can she eat this?" He asked. Why did she choose his plate? There was plenty of other food on the table. She laughingly answered him that his piece looked more appetizing, and the MC smiled, watching the two. And so began a drinking party that seemed to have no end in sight. The sight of Mujin casually drinking with the Poison Emperor was enough to attract everyone's attention. Meanwhile, several more matches passed, and all eyes were directed only at Mujin and the Poison Emperor. This made the head of the Sok clan, Sok Ildo, who was hosting the Little Dragon Ascension tournament, become more and more irritated. He entered the arena and announced a duel between young Master Hua Dojin of the Yomwa sect and young Master Sok Trion of the Sok clan. He invited the participants into the arena, and Dojin rose from the table, saying he had to go. The MC joyfully punched the air and told him to show off his best. He grabbed a sword and, slightly nervous, entered the arena, and Sumoon was surprised to notice that he would have a weapon. The representative of the Yomwa sect would fight not with his fists, but with swordsmanship. The referee announced the start of the duel, and the boys raised their swords. Meanwhile, Ildo silently told Chion that victory in this duel was his. Let him demonstrate the power of the Sok Otter and attract the attention of the Poison Emperor. Chion pounced on his opponent, and Dojin immediately swung his sword, after which the boy collapsed to the floor, not even realizing what had happened. Ildo was greatly surprised, as were the other guests. They didn't even notice the blow. Soyeon jumped up in joy for her brother, and Elder Cho shouted that even if he died today, he would have no regrets. Even the Poison Emperor jumped up in surprise and declared this astonishingly effective swordsmanship. He had no idea the Yomwa sect possessed such amazing swordsmanship. Mujin grinned and said that the swordsmanship Dojin demonstrated wasn't just a highly effective swordsmanship, but a swordsmanship technique that incorporated the principles of advanced martial arts. He was surprised, and the others began to whisper, after which he took out a notebook and said that this swordsmanship was called the art of destructive spiritual swordsmanship. They were all dazzled by the unimaginable energy emanating from the secret manual, and the MC, climbing onto the table, loudly announced that anyone who wanted to master the swordsmanship of the destructive spirit sword could join the Yomwa sect. As they had all seen in the Dojin duel, mastering just the first half of this sword technique would lead to significant growth in martial arts. They excitedly raised their hands, expressing their desire to join, and he told them to contact Manager Du about it. Baekshun took out a notebook and asked everyone to line up, and a crowd of people immediately ran up to him, which shocked Haya. Her grandfather laughed and asked, recruiting into the ranks of the sect in the middle of such an event? He really lives up to his reputation as a madman. Ildo, meanwhile, was furious. How dare this impudent idiot behave like this here? If only the Emperor of Poisons hadn't come here. Siyun approached him and asked if he would really allow their sect to do whatever they wanted. He replied that the Poison Emperor was watching. What could they do? He said with a smirk that, however, they couldn't just do the work and then pass the fruits on to someone else. He had one plan for this matter. They would change the participants of the tournament, adding Seok Yoseo to the list. As the influence of the Yomwa sect, which had dominated Seochang for some time, began to wane, the Sok and Baek clans immediately planned to fill this vacuum with their own power. Through the Little Dragon Ascension tournament, held once every 5 years, they manipulated the tournament bracket to ensure that their disciples emerged victorious. They then sent them to renowned tournaments of the orthodox powers to increase the fame of their clans. In other words, the clan's fame was their power. This is how they monopolized the Little Dragon Ascension tournament and expanded their influence. Ildo announced the final match of the 16th tournament. Young Master Ban Yowol of the Half Moon sect would face young Master Sok Yoso. Sumoon told Mujin that whoever won this match would be his younger brother's opponent in the next match. Seeing this boy, Elder Cho was surprised and asked why he was here. MC asked if something was wrong. Was he strong? He replied that he was the winner of the previous Little Dragon Ascension tournament. As far as he knew, he had now begun training at the main temple of the Diankang sect. Yoseo, meanwhile, asked Yowol if he was his opponent again. The boy was very surprised to see him here. This was a tournament that only those under 14 could participate in. He smirked and called him an idiot, saying he knew it and that he was 14. He was indignant and exclaimed that he was lying, saying he was 15 now, but Yoseo didn't let him finish and attacked him, hitting him several times, which made Dojin feel uneasy. Yoseo easily won and said that worms should crawl silently on the ground, saying that he hadn't celebrated his birthday yet this year. Huangbon was indignant and was about to go and sort this out, but Mujin told him to leave it at that, saying that he was the perfect opponent. His younger brother was nervous about the upcoming fight. Evening came, and the referee announced the start of the next match, asking everyone to pay special attention. This was the most heated confrontation. Young Master Hua Dojin would be competing against the strongest contender for victory in this tournament, Sok Yoseo from the Diankang sect. Sumoon remarked that it looked like they were witnessing the final duel prematurely. Siyun, meanwhile, smirked, while Ildo sat with a gloomy expression. The elders began to cheer for Dojin as hard as they could, while MC focused on the fight. Yosho told his opponent that he heard he had used a decent fencing technique, Because of him, his younger brother, who should have taken second place in this tournament, had withdrawn from the competition. He frowned and asked, "Do you want to avenge him?" He laughed and said that was ridiculous nonsense. He didn't care about such things. He was simply making it so that bugs like him couldn't pick up a sword again. He swung his weapon, used the 12 shining sword strikes technique, and immediately pounced on him. Dojin saw several sword paths at once and began swinging his weapon, parrying each blow, which was difficult. His opponent laughed and said that if he continued to simply block his attacks, his skull would be crushed in the blink of an eye. Dojin grew nervous and blocked another blow, while Sumoon admiringly declared that this was the Dienkang sect's signature fast swordsmanship. Something like this could be quite difficult to handle. Mujin remained silent and continued to watch his brother closely, while Ildo smirked and silently told Yoso that this was right. Let him show those idiots just how vast the skill gap was between them. Meanwhile, Yoso struck again, and laughed at his opponent, saying that watching him swing his sword would bring tears to his eyes. Dojin gritted his teeth and ducked sharply, dodging the blow. He then adjusted his grip on the sword and struck downward, but Yoso dodged and immediately countered, saying he'd been waiting for him to do so. Dojin tried to block the blow, but the wooden sword struck him square in the fingers. Then Yoso used the same technique again, and Dojin nearly fell, but he managed to regain his balance and block the next blow. Several more attacks rained down on him, and this time, he couldn't take it anymore and fell. And Yosio approached him with his sword raised, saying that although it was too early, it was time to end this duel. Just as he was about to strike, a blue bag flew at his sword, and he stopped. He looked in the direction from which it was thrown and saw an enraged Mujin, who was drilling him with a murderous glare. He smirked and asked, "What kind of idiotic stunt is this?" He left the arena, saying goodbye to Dojin, and he tried to move his fingers, but it was very painful. They even turned black. The MC told him to let him examine his hands first, after which Dojin left the arena, and he said that this idiot deliberately aimed for the knuckles. It will hurt, but he should be patient. The old men and Soyun were very worried about Dojin. He bit his lower lip to keep from screaming in pain. After which, Mujin set his bones and said that with such hands it will be difficult for him to use a sword. What will he do? He asked him to tie the sword to his hand, and he agreed. After this, Dojin returned to the arena with a confident look, and Sumoon remarked that this was impressive determination for someone so young. The MC said that after all, he wasn't just a kid from some insignificant martial arts clan. This was at least something he should be able to do. Yoso, meanwhile, told the boy that he saw him in a new light. He thought he would come and beg him to accept his defeat. Is he ready to fight? Now that he's back, he'll have to accept the consequences. After all, the same thing will happen to him that happened to his older brother when he was little. These words angered Dojin, and Yoso lashed out at him, exclaiming that from today on, he would become the new disabled person of Seochang, matching his older brother's skills. Dojin focused and remembered what his brother had told him before he returned to the arena. Mujin asked, "Do you want to win?" He replied that he had to win. He needed to take first place and restore the honor of their sect. MC smiled and told him not to worry about it. His older brother would make their sect the greatest in Seochang again. The only thing he needed to do was focus on the duel. He would tell him the method that would lead him to victory. The very moment he used his sword technique, he would see a tiny gap right in the middle. At that second, he should not hesitate and strike quickly. Dojin did just that, rushing towards his opponent, surprising him, and then striking him in the chest, causing him to feel pain and being thrown back. Everyone was amazed by his strike, and Dojin himself smiled, glad that he was able to do it. Yoso fell on his back. The old man excitedly praised Dojin, as did his sister. Yoso, meanwhile, quickly got up and furiously asked how dare he point a sword at his body. Dojin clicked his tongue in frustration and braced himself, wondering if the blow had been too weak. Yoso threatened him that he wouldn't leave the arena alive, and a red bag suddenly flew at his face. After that, he looked around in rage and shouted, "Who threw that in his face?" Mujin called him an idiot and said it was him. He approached his brother and said that he had worked hard. That was enough. He smiled and suggested that he go home, and the judge asked, "Are they really quitting the tournament?" He replied that he had already achieved everything there was to gain here, so he saw no point in going any further. This wasn't some big martial arts tournament, so he wasn't going to gamble his younger brother's future for a trivial victory. Elder Cho looked at Dojin's hands and said that they needed to hurry to get him the treatment he needed. Sumoon called out to Mujin and asked, "Is he leaving? Since their meeting must be predetermined by fate, how about sharing another bottle of alcohol at his place?" His granddaughter asked in surprise, "Is he really going to go to this man's house?" MC didn't object, then headed for the exit, and the guests began to whisper, "Did he really refuse to participate? And the Emperor of Poisons leaves with him." Yoso, meanwhile, clicked his tongue in displeasure, saying that he had ruined all his fun, and Ildo was very angry. Meanwhile, 3 men were walking down the street and passersby recognized them. Hong Johan from the Sosul sect said that today he would wring the neck of this sleeping dragon, and Black Crow said that he entrusted it to him. He was dangerous. Johan turned to the 3rd man and told him not to worry about it because even the brothers from the Red Sword sect came with them. There was definitely no one in Seochan who could stop them. Is he right? Chu Seochan laughed and said he was stating the obvious. The second the Red Sword sect took over, they could forget all their worries and doubts. Johan laughed, saying it was encouraging. They reached the Yeomwa sect gate and Johan chuckled, asking how it could even be called a gate. It was rotten to the core and would soon fall apart. He decided to tear down this old building himself and kicked it down, startling Masak and indignantly asking, "What are they doing? Why are they breaking down someone else's gate?" He mockingly apologized to him. It was so rotten that he thought this residence had no owner. But more importantly, he, a mere servant, dared to raise his voice at him. This made Masak nervous. Meanwhile, 4 demons were walking down the street. Cholmuk patted his rounded belly and said that for a satisfying meal, there definitely had to be meat on the table. Dongjok said that they already ate meat every day, and he laughed, explaining that he meant that they would never get tired of meat even if they ate it every day. Chungtae said that the girl from the tavern was very cute. She seemed to match their second brother's ideal type. He had been staring at her all the time, hadn't he? He sheepishly denied everything, and they approached the sect. Cholmuk looked at the gate with confusion and asked why the entrance was in such a state. He knew this would happen one day because the wood was too rotten, and when he saw what was happening inside, his eyes widened. The 3 men pinned poor Masuk to the ground, and Johan, putting his foot on his head, asked what was taking them so long. That's what happens when you keep a bunch of worthless scum as guards. Well, if the boss is a sick idiot, then his subordinates must be the same. Seochan said he heard he'd teamed up with a gang of bandits, and Johan noted that judging by the appearance of these idiots, it looked like the rumors were true. Changtae asked why Masok was lying on the ground. Cholmuk noted that he clearly hadn't fallen prostrate to pay respects. Johan laughed and said that now that he looked closely, it was clear to him that they had gathered not warriors, but clowns. They were complete idiots. Dongjok grinned ominously and said that he could ask them later what they were talking about. Why were they standing there? Let them draw their weapons. Black Crow took a closer look at them and said he thought he'd seen them somewhere before. At that moment, all 4 of them pounced on them, and they didn't even have time to understand what was happening. When Mujin and the others returned to the sect, they were surprised. He immediately asked what had happened, since those 4 were pinning down 3 people on the ground. Cholmuk greeted him with a respectful gesture and told him that they had simply stepped away for a quick bite to eat, and those bandits had pinned Masak to the ground and started causing a disturbance. So they dealt with them right away. Masok, in tears, rushed into the young master's arms, saying he had been so scared, but he didn't let him get close. Noticing Black Crow, he asked if he was here too. He had spared his life on the condition that he'd bring him money, but in the end, he had called his buddies with swords and caused a disturbance. He immediately fell to his knees, begging for mercy, and he said that he didn't even want to listen to him, and ordered the warriors to raise those idiots. They let them go, and MC asked, "Who are they? Have they come to avenge that one-eyed man?" Seochan introduced himself, saying that he is known as Death in One Step. He was surprised to notice that he even had a nickname. He must have managed to accumulate quite a lot of property. Sumoon asked, "Is he part of the alliance of the unorthodox forces of the 4 martial heavens?" Seochan was very scared when he saw his aura, and he asked, "A member of the Red Sword himself set foot on Seochang's lands, and even attacked a family that is on the side of the Orthodox Alliance? Should this be taken as a declaration of war?" His aura flared, instilling fear in the others. Elder Cho found it difficult to contain it. It was an incredibly murderous aura. Seochan, meanwhile, nervously thought, "Why is this man here? What is his relationship with the Yeomwa sect? One of the strongest warriors in Jianghu is currently the Emperor of Poisons. They must not disturb his peace of mind under any circumstances, otherwise the Red Sword will disappear without a trace." He bowed to him, hitting his forehead on the ground, and exclaimed that they had sinned. He began to bow to him, begging the Emperor of Poisons to let them go, and those guys from the Sosal sect were very scared when they heard this name. Sumoon said that he apparently decided to test his patience. Today his bones will go on their table as a snack with liquor, and tomorrow he will flay his brothers. He excitedly exclaimed that there was a misunderstanding, that they did not mean that at all. Mujin, fed up with all this, stamped his foot, dispelling the old man's aura. Haya was very surprised, thinking that this couldn't be true. He instantly dispelled her grandfather's murderous energy, which was like a typhoon. The old man found this interesting, and MC threateningly told him to keep his distance. There were children here. Anyone watching from the outside would think he was the boss. The old man looked at him closely, then laughed and apologized. He was just having fun intimidating these guys. Mujin asked Elder Cho to take the children and Masok to a healer. Afterwards, they quickly left, and Soyeon, displeased, said she wanted to watch a little longer. After making sure the children were gone, MC returned to the boys and picked up a sharp stick, saying that not only had they mocked someone else's servant, but they had also destroyed these precious oak gates. He stuck a stick into his shoulder and asked if he even knew what kind of gate it was. He started picking at his wound, tormenting him, and said that it was a 100-year-old oak gate that had been struck by lightning, but it continued to stand, filled with the energy of the Big Dipper and imbued with the spirit of his grandfather. This was not something that could be easily obtained anywhere. He screamed in pain and asked him to stop. He was not the one who knocked down this gate. He smirked and said that in any case, since he had aided in this matter, let him bring him 10,000 yang as compensation for his complicity. He exclaimed that this was nonsense, and the warriors thought, how dare he speak to him so insolently? Mujin asked if he should continue to screw this splinter into his flesh. He screamed in pain and promised him that he would do anything. Let him just pull it out. He pulled out a stick and said that he could have done this from the very beginning, then turned to Johan and asked, does this mean it was his doing? He got scared and immediately asked him for forgiveness. He had committed a sin worthy of death, and MC said that then he must bring 20,000 yang. He bowed to him, promising to do so, and then it was Black Crow's turn. He immediately fell at his feet and began to beg for forgiveness, promising him that such a thing would not happen again. Mujin executed him on the spot without further ado. His head rolled towards Johan, causing him to quietly and frightenedly cry out, and MC said, but there would be no second time. He told Johan that all of this idiot's property now belonged to him. Let him sell all his belongings and bring the proceeds here. He has time until tomorrow, and now let him go. He answered him that he understood everything. And Haya looked closely at Mujin and thought about something. Within days, the sect's residence was rapidly transforming, becoming completely unrecognizable. The old front gate with peeling paint was replaced with thick new oak gates. The walls, roof, and even the cracked stone floor began to be replaced with new materials. And that's far from all. Martial artists wishing to pass the test to join the sect continued to arrive in an endless stream. Earning a salary while training in advanced martial arts was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, so such a reaction was quite natural. But something made MC extremely uncomfortable. The Poison Emperor and his granddaughter were still visiting. Sumoon tried the tea and said it was especially fragrant today, and Mujin wondered, what the hell are they doing here? Haya smiled and said that it turned out the Yomwa sect residents had plenty of high-quality tea leaves, and MC wondered, why are they visiting here every day? He decided to ask them about it, but Sumoon ignored his question and invited him to join them. This tea had an incredible taste. He said that he was sure the Tang clan must have whole mountains of tea of even better quality. So why did he continue to drink it here? Sumoon told him not to be such a cheapskate. It was just a couple of cups. He was indignant at his words, and he laughed at him, telling him not to worry. He was joking. He looked around the sect territory and asked, isn't it wonderful? The place where a person lives should be filled with such vital energy. He glanced at the men who were fixing everything and said that they were trying hard to do their job. Thanks to this atmosphere, both the food and the tea become even tastier. He even forgot about his old age for a moment, and he was so grateful for it. Mujin wondered, what did this happen to him suddenly? Sumoon asked, was it the art of movement? He was talking about the energy that he controls. He confirmed this, and he, placing a cup of tea on the table, said that he hoped he understood, and suddenly swung his hand forcefully. MC reacted quickly and blocked the blow, and then the tip of the blade suddenly appeared in front of his eye. But he jumped aside and began to dodge the old man's blows. Haya worriedly called out to her grandfather, and Baekshun, seeing the two fighting, became very worried and asked what happened. Sumoon clenched his fist, smoke emanating from under his fingers, and then he blew on his palm and sent a poisonous explosive strike at Mujin, who cursed and assumed a stance for the third technique of the nine-sword solo. He screamed and swung the heaven-cutting sword with all his might, and its energy gushed in all directions along with the wind. The old man stopped attacking, and MC wondered, what kind of powder was this? It wasn't poisonous. The old man said that, as he thought, it was the nine-sword solo. He was surprised and asked if he knew about this technique. He answered that he had seen it used only once, but he could not forget it. He apologized. He really needed to find out what kind of fencing technique he was using. He invited him to return to the table, which made him confused, after which he sighed heavily and thought that he was seeing such an extraordinary old man for the first time. Sumoon sat down on a chair and sighed heavily from the pain in his back, after which he asked his granddaughter to fill his cup. His throat was dry. She poured him tea, and he said that he never thought that something like this would happen in his life. He was able to see the use of this fencing art again. How did this happen? Where did the eldest son of the Yomwa sect learn about this sword technique? He said that he should be the first to voice his question. How did he learn about this fencing art? He smiled and told him about it. When he was a child, he followed his grandfather and older brother when they went fishing. At that time, his grandfather's mastery of poisons reached the heavens, so people dubbed him the Heavenly Emperor of Poisons. Although he had retired, he was still full of energy. He remained an absolute master of the highest level. But then he appeared in their path, his teacher. Their grandfather ordered them to step aside. He and his brother immediately ran to the rocks. He was curious about what was going on there and kept peeking out from behind cover, and his brother told him to stay down, but he was worried about his grandfather. Then the fight began. His grandfather attacked first. He struck a quick blow that caught his opponent off guard, and then threw several knives at him, but he deflected them all with his sword. Then the Emperor of Poisons drew his sword and approached him, and he attacked, causing him to jump. The Poison Emperor blew a poisonous explosive powder at him, and he used the 9-sword solo, heaven-cutting sword, to counter it. Seeing the cloud disperse, the Sword Emperor rushed at him in frustration, and he ran towards him with a scream. It was an indescribable sight. He still remembers every detail. If he had seen that fight with his own eyes, he would have felt the same. He rooted for his grandfather with every fiber of his being. But that man easily defeated the Heavenly Poison Emperor, who was called the strongest of his time, with only 9 sword techniques. And then, without uttering a single word, he continued on his way. He was young, so he could only watch. After that incident, only one phrase stuck in his head. 9-sword solo. Maybe that's his name? Mujin said it was the name of a swordsmanship art, and he said with a smile that now he understood why 9 swords. So, he's that master's student? He told him that he wasn't officially his teacher, but he was still training under him for now. He asked what for now meant. MC asked him to accept that answer. It was hard for him to explain all the nuances. One day, when a legitimate heir would emerge to continue this legacy, he would teach him this sword technique. He didn't ask any questions and apologized for attacking him. MC thought for a moment and then asked if he knew anything about a swordless mark. Haya was surprised to hear that, and her grandfather clarified that by swordless mark, he meant inflicting a slash without contact with a sword. He had never heard of anything like that. After hearing that answer, MC said he had business to attend to, so he was leaving. He wished them a good time, and Sumoon asked him to wait. He also had one question for him. To be honest, that was why he visited his house so often. Mujin turned to him with a questioning look, and the old man asked with a smile what he thought of his granddaughter. Haya immediately became indignant and embarrassed, and the MC asked what he meant. He laughed and called him a sly one, pretending not to understand anything. How does he view her, as his wife? This question sounded like thunder to him. The old man grinned, waiting for an answer, and of course, everyone around heard it and was surprised. And the 4 demons asked, "So he's planning on getting married?" Mujin didn't even know what to say. The old man kept pressing him, asking for an answer. He, looking at the embarrassed girl, remembered his beloved and answered with a bitter smile that he wasn't planning on getting married, at least not in this life. Haya wondered what this meant, and when he calmly said that he didn't particularly like her, she became indignant and exclaimed that she herself didn't like a husband like him. Sumoon looked at him in surprise and asked if he preferred men. He indignantly exclaimed that this was not true at all. Who did he take him for? Sumoon pointed to his granddaughter and said that then he did not understand how it was possible to reject her, the woman every man desired. He answered that everyone had their own preferences and asked him to respect his taste, after which he left, citing business. The old man touched his chin in puzzlement and said that this was strange. He was still completely blind to such things? This could not be. His granddaughter embarrassedly asked him to stop. She almost died of shame because of him. He asked perplexedly what was the matter. It was obvious that she was interested in him, so he decided to put in a good word for her. She became indignant and asked when such a thing had happened. She could not stand those who behaved so arrogantly and recklessly. He said that in that case, nothing could be done. Next time, he should come here with her younger sister. Chona was calmer than she was, and she had a good character. Haya immediately fell silent, and he said with a smile that finding such a worthy man was no easy task. She turned and walked away, saying that in that case, he should stay here and live with young Master Hua. He stood up excitedly and asked her to wait and go with him. He had also already drunk everything. Haya cast a last, offended glance at Mujin, and seeing that he was completely unconcerned about what had just happened, she immediately turned away from him. MC, meanwhile, asked the elder if everyone was there. He confirmed it and added that today was the last day for enrollment in their sect. A total of 230 warriors had joined them. Mujin approached the assembled warriors and loudly introduced himself, saying that he would be brief. He doesn't care what made them join the Manhwa sect. All he wants is for them to become strong and fulfill their assigned duties. The selection test for the sect's warriors begins today. For some of them, this could be the hardest test of their lives. Anyone who wishes to leave can stop taking the test at any time, but if they endure, a reward awaits them. He asked the instructors to come forward and said that before them were 4 martial arts instructors who would be in charge of their training. From now on, they were to follow all their instructions. He wished them good luck and left, telling them to try to survive, and then they would meet again. Cholmuk grinned and introduced himself to them, saying that he was the senior instructor, and that the selection test for warriors began today. They all had to load these sacks of rice onto their backs right now. They turned to the sacks and asked in surprise, "Is he serious? And how are they supposed to do that?" Kolmuk asked, "What's wrong? Are they unable to lift it?" "In that case, there's another way, namely, defeating them, the 4 instructors, in a duel. Anyone who wins will not only pass the test, but also immediately receive the position of instructor." They became nervous because they knew what they were capable of, and some decided to leave because they didn't want to die so early, but Dongjok stopped them and asked who allowed them to do that. They were surprised, because the young master had just told them this, and Dongjok said that he really said that anyone could leave whenever they wanted, but there was no word about them being able to leave unharmed. Let them decide, will they take the test or leave the residence after he beats them to death? From the very beginning, they had no choice, and so they took the bags and began training. The instructor shouted that if any of them dropped the bag, he would stuff all the beans that fell out of the bag into their mouths. And if any of them started whining, he would rip them in half, starting from the groin. Let them stand up to their full height properly. MC watched them and thought with a smile that everything was going just fine. Around the same time, an emaciated man appeared at the far gate of the Yomwa sect residence. Despite his fatigue, he continued to drag his feet towards the sect, saying that he needed to hurry. He must come to the Yomwa sect residence quickly with a report. He saw a servant at the gate and extended his hand to him, asking for help and to tell the young master something, but quickly lost all strength and fell to the ground unconscious. Masok noticed him and wondered what he was talking about. He rushed to his aid and, seeing who it was, immediately reported everything to Mujin. Night fell, the man was carried into the residence, and MC asked if he was feeling any better. Baekshun told him that the doctor said his life was not in danger, and he cursed, saying that those idiots from the Chonghua Merchant Guild had finally made their move. Baekshun said that he heard they had stationed their warriors on the shopping streets and were committing all sorts of atrocities. Some of the merchants who resisted were being beaten to death. Mujin ordered him to tell Masok to prepare weapons, and he asked in surprise, "Right now?" He replied that he had told him more than once that debts and grievances must be settled without any delay. They would just move out a little earlier. Let Dongjok handle the warriors who were undergoing the test, and Cholmuk, Nosak, and Chante should arm themselves. Baekshun said that he would do everything, then hurried out of the room and left, while the children hid behind the boxes. Soyeon smirked and asked her brother, did he hear everything? They were finally going to have a showdown with those scum. He hesitantly asked if they really needed to watch people die. She told him not to talk nonsense, and if he didn't go, she would follow them alone. He immediately agreed, and when everything was ready, MC and the warriors set out, and they followed, anticipating adventure. They ran into the forest, and the two barely kept up with them, wondering how they moved so quickly. Mujin ordered everyone to stop. He noticed people hiding in the shadows of the trees, and they emerged from their hiding places, surrounding them. The children hid behind rocks at the edge of the forest, and Soyeon caught her breath, asking what was going on there. Cholmuk looked around and asked if they were ambushing them. MC smirked and said that, as expected, they were the idiot's target. After that, the fight began. Cholmuk scattered everyone with his steel fists, Nosak armed himself with a stick, and Chante wielded an axe. Meanwhile, Mujin encountered their leader. He pounced on him in a jump, delivered a blow that he couldn't block, and smiled. The children continued to watch. Soyeon said that now she understood what a real fight was. Her hands trembled from the fact that the smell of blood could be felt even here. The enemy squad was eliminated. Chante looked around and said that the cleanup was complete. MC saw that Cholmuk captured one alive and asked him to leave his mouth free so he could speak. Who is the client? If he answers, he will spare his life. Cholmuk threateningly told the guy that the young master asked him a question, and he exclaimed that he will tell them everything. They are from the Ark of the Dispossessed and came here at the request of the Chonghua Guild. He asked, so they were behind the attack on the children that time? He seemed to have said very clearly that he would kill anyone who stood in his way. The guy begged him for mercy, swearing that he knew nothing about it, and Mujin ordered Cholmuk to let him go. He was surprised and asked, is he serious now? He let go, and he immediately grabbed at the injured area, thinking that this monster single-handedly killed dozens of people. MC ordered him to go to his people and give them a message from him. He will kill everyone he sees. So he challenges them to continue in the same spirit. After that, the guy ran in fear. He ran past the children and did not even notice them. Soyeon looked after him in fear, after which she told her brother that it was too late. Isn't it time for them to go back? He agreed with her, and suddenly Cholmuk's voice was heard right next to them, asking who was there. They looked up and saw a huge man flying towards them, which scared them greatly, and then they collided. In the end, they both emerged from hiding with huge bruises on their foreheads, and asked their older brother for forgiveness. He said that he understood their feelings, but if the enemy had noticed them first, they would have lost their lives. He pointed to the pile of bodies and told them to look there. Do they think they knew they would die today? Most people don't have the opportunity to choose their death. There is no guarantee that they won't suffer the same fate. The choices they make ultimately decide whether they will live or not. This is what this place is like, Murim. Death always follows close behind. Let them never act rashly. Do they understand? They answered him that they understood everything, and he said that it was dangerous to return at night, so let them spend the night here with him, and at dawn they will set off back to the residence. Nosak struck a stone against a stone, starting a fire, then threw the torch into the pile of bodies and burned them. The sound of burning raw flesh seemed simultaneously familiar and unfamiliar. The smell thickly permeated the dark forest, and for the two children, it became a memory they would never forget. At dawn, Mujin immediately sent them back with Chante. He told them to leave quickly. Their residence must have already been searched. Chante called them little troublemakers and led them away, and MC, after watching them go, turned toward the forest and said that they were also a little late, so they needed to speed up. At the same time, There was a commotion in the Yeomwa residence. Hwangban was chasing servants and warriors throughout the residence to find them, and Masuk was clutching his head. He said that he had checked that they had gone to bed last night. Where had they gone, and what were they doing? Meanwhile, they were walking through the forest. Chungtae asked Dojin. Young Miss Hwa Soyeon persuaded him to come with her, didn't she? She confirmed this and noted that he was very observant, and he said that it couldn't be more obvious because the young lady was the main driver of everything in the Yeomwa residence. Dojin agreed with him. He told her he wouldn't go, so she started threatening, leaving him no choice. Suddenly, a woman screamed for help. They turned toward the voice and saw a man looming over the woman, and she was crying and begging him to take his hands off her. He licked his lips and told her to keep resisting. The other woman couldn't withstand his grip, but she was holding on pretty well. The woman saw Changtae and extended her hand to him, asking for help, and he indignantly asked how anyone could do such a thing in broad daylight. He told the children to wait for him there, but when he saw the man, he froze. He looked like a demon that could tear him to pieces. He smiled nervously and suggested that the children quickly return to the residence. Everyone was probably worried sick. He glanced at the man and thought that if he started a fight, he would be finished. He laughed nervously, deliberately saying loudly that they would go their separate ways, and the man turned to him with a smirk, ordering him to get out of his sight. But Dojin wasn't going to just stand there and watch. He walked up to him and asked if he wanted to tell him something, or maybe he wanted to enjoy the spectacle. Dojin clenched his teeth in rage and said that grabbing a nun in broad daylight was vile. He called him a vile idiot without shame or conscience, and told him to get his filthy hands off her right now. Changtae was very scared, because his words meant that they were finished. The man let her go, and looking down at the child, asked threateningly, "Who was this insolent brat? He thinks he won't be killed because he's too young? He'll chop off all his limbs, and then enjoy his screams in the company of that nun." Changtae immediately rushed to his defense and swung his axe, but he dodged, bending his upper body back. The man swung his leg, hitting him in the face, and he wondered what kind of move that was. After that, he grabbed the sword and Changtae fell, causing Dojin to become worried, and the man licked his lips and asked, "So he's a martial arts master?" Changtae stood up, and the boy asked if he was okay, and he cursed, saying that he was a real martial arts master. He whispered to the young master that when he gave the signal, they should immediately run with the young mistress towards the residence, without looking back, without stopping for a second. They had trained a lot, so they would be able to run quickly. He rushed into battle and gave them the signal, after which they broke into a run, and his axe collided with the blade of that demon. He laughed and said that he did not expect to have the opportunity to warm up a little. He likes it. This arrangement suits him too. Changtae was about to hit him with a second axe, but he dodged this time too and kicked him in the face, sending him flying. Quickly got up, and the swordsman immediately pounced on him and said that the way he writhes and flounders is quite a sight to behold. He wants to see it again. He struck. Changtae blocked it and thought that he wields the sword quickly, but his blows are also incredibly accurate. Perhaps he is even better than young Master Mujin. The opponent struck again and asked, "Aren't you going to show him this?" The children didn't listen to him and stayed behind, worried about him. When the man lunged at him, intending to kill him, he stared at the blade approaching his chest and thought that if he died now, the other two would be in danger. The enemy's blade clanged against someone's heavy sword, but fortunately, Mujin arrived in time to help him. Seeing his skill, the swordsman was surprised, and MC gathered more strength and delivered a blow that knocked his weapon away. He hesitated and exclaimed, "What just happened?" Seeing their brother, the children were overjoyed, and he began exchanging quick blows with the swordsman. Changtae stepped aside and thought he knew he was coming, but his sword was being pushed back. Mujin was surprised himself, and his opponent said that at least he looked like he knew how to swing a sword. He was overjoyed by this and pounced on him with a moonstrike chain, which he was barely able to contain. He held his sword in front of him, blocking the blows, but still, many cuts appeared on his body. Finally, other warriors arrived. Nosak noticed that it looked like the attack had landed on him. Cholmuk's mouth fell open in surprise, and he wondered how he was doing it from such a distance. Did he really have some kind of divine weapon in his hands? He concentrated and told Nosak that they were facing an incredible martial artist. They needed to give it their all. He agreed with him, but Changtae told Cholmuk to stop. He was beyond their strength. If they interfered, they would only be in the way. Let him take a closer look. He dodged all the fatal blows and didn't let that idiot's sword reach him. The nun watched the fight unfold with concern. The man lunged at him, and MC noticed literally everything about him. The speed of the sword, the trajectory of the swing, the force of the impact upon collision, and even the number of sparks emitted at that moment. All of this is of great importance. He blocked the blow, and the man angrily called him an idiot, asking how he parried all of his attacks. He decided to unleash a blow from all of his sword tactics, and Mujin remembered his teacher's words. The true power of the 9 swords solo is revealed only when confronted with a powerful sword. He asked, "So, these 9 swords are stronger than his demonic spirit sword?" He called him a little brat and exclaimed that it was obvious that his sword was stronger. MC returned from his memories and thought that there was just a little more to go. He parried the blow and said with a smile that he had caught every blow with his sword. after which he made a deft move and threw the swordsman away from himself. He thought it was a blow to the shoulder. Mujin turned around, approached him and delivered a powerful blow that immediately finished him off. Everyone was surprised by this sight. His body fell to the ground and he, breathing heavily, said that he was defeated by some brat. What a laughingstock. What is his name? He told him his name, and he smiled, asking, so he is from the Hua clan? After that, his gaze dimmed, and MC wished that he would have no peace even in death, and in the next life that he would not dare to mess with people like him. Another nun came to the scene and stared at them in surprise, thinking what happened while she was gone? Huamujin? She had heard that name before. Is this that crazy young master from the Yomwa sect? Is he really that strong? Meanwhile, he approached his brother and asked, is he injured anywhere? He told him that he was fine thanks to Chengte. He was the one who stopped that man. Chengte asked how he knew he had to come here. He told him that he just felt uneasy. What happened all of a sudden? He told him that the man he struck down tried to abuse those nuns. Since his younger brother and sister were there, they were just going to pass by, but young Master Dojin stepped forward and shouted at him. That's how it all started. He was surprised and asked, did Dojin really do that? His brother apologized to him, he just couldn't pass by. But MC just smiled and asked, does that mean he has a sense of justice? He looked up at him in surprise, realizing he was praising him. A nun approached them and said she was Myeolryong, a first-generation disciple of the Ime sect. Thanks to him, she had managed to save her life. He asked her to drop their introduction and said he had a question. What was the name of the man who had just died? He had never heard of a martial artist of such caliber being here. The nun replied that he was an outstanding martial artist known as the Crimson Moon Sword. He was from the Crescent Moon Sword School, which is part of the unorthodox Four Martial Heavens Alliance. Suddenly appearing before them, he started a quarrel, demanding that they tell him the location of their younger sister. She had heard of his depraved lifestyle, but she hadn't expected him to attack without warning. Mujin remarked that it was no wonder his swordsmanship was so rough and dirty. Once again, he faced a representative of the Four Martial Heavens. The woman thanked him for his help. How could she pay off this debt? He told them to thank Changtae and Dojin. He wasn't going to save them. The woman thanked them both, and Dojin waved his hands excitedly, saying there was no need to thank him. He hadn't done anything. MC looked at him with a smile and then said they were leaving and that they should return to the residence. Changtae said goodbye, asking him to be careful, and they ran back. Myeolryong looked after them with a smile and thought that all this time she thought the rumors were greatly exaggerated. But perhaps a wind of change really was blowing in Seochang. Closer to nightfall, they reached their destination, where Kwano met them. He burst into tears and asked, is this a dream or reality? Is it really him in front of him? Mujin said with a smile that he had come to fulfill his promise. How is he doing? Kwano turned to his servants and exclaimed, why are they standing here? Let them prepare everything immediately to receive their glorious guests. The warriors were hungry from the journey and immediately began to eat, and Kwano apologized for the modest reception. Things hadn't been going well lately. Nosak said that despite this, the food tasted amazing, and MC noticed that his face had become very thin. He must be going through hard times. He laughed awkwardly and asked, is it that noticeable? He was embarrassed. Guanyo and Yochin ran into the room and joyfully told Mujin that he had really come. They couldn't believe that he personally decided to make such a long journey. After all, neither an army of 1,000 men nor a cavalry of 10,000 warriors could compare to him. They rose from the table, greeting them, and they asked how he had endured such a dangerous journey. Had nothing happened to him? He told them with a smile that on the way here, he encountered about 30 assassins and also defeated some idiot nicknamed Crimson Moon Sword. Hearing this, Guanyo was very surprised and said that if this is the Crimson Moon Sword, then he is from the Union of Four Martial Heavens. Kwano asked if he really fought him and won. He confirmed it and asked if there was any problem with that. The man said with surprise that he defeated such a brutal martial artist. It was amazing. This victory will further enhance the reputation of the Sleeping Dragon, whose rumors were just beginning to spread. After that, MC told them the purpose of his visit, and Kwano said that he couldn't believe that the deputy head of a trading group could be beaten so badly. He should have sent some warriors with him, but he was too overconfident. Mujin said that their tyranny was growing stronger every day, and that if they turned a blind eye to what was happening, they would bring warriors and take over this place. They asked what they should do, and he said the answer was obvious. Since they had come this far, all that remained was to draw their sword. After all, that was why he had come here. The man asked in surprise, will he personally take action against them? He confirmed this, but before he could act, he needed a suitable pretext. They would start with a nearby textile workers' street. The three of them would need to prepare some things. The next day arrived, and Cholmuk and Nosak were strolling along the empty street, looking around. Cholmuk remarked that it was so quiet and empty, and Nosak agreed. He couldn't believe there was not a soul here. This was the first time he had seen a shopping street without people. At this rate, trade would dry up. Cholmuk noticed an inn nearby and wondered, is this the place? They sat down at the table and asked the owner to bring food, and then a man approached them and asked what brought such glorious warriors to such a seedy tavern. The food in this place tasted disgusting. The tavern across the street made such delicious noodles that they would be delighted. The tavern owner could not say anything in his defense, as he was afraid, and Cholmuk glanced at the tavern across the road and saw warriors there glaring at them. He replied that he did not see much of a difference. He was too lazy to go anywhere, so he would just eat here. The man told him not to argue, but to just move. This place was disgusting. Nosak called out to him discontentedly and said that he was annoying his older brother. He should just get out of their sight. He became slightly nervous under their gaze, did not try to persuade them, and returned to his people. He spoke with one of them, after which the man stood up and they headed towards them together. He approached their table and said that the food here was terrible. Do they want to go with them to that tavern across the street? Cholmuk smirked and called them idiots. Whether the food here is good or not is up to him to decide after he eats. He thinks he knows everything about his taste preferences. They got angry and called him an idiot with a bandit face and said that they were actually trying to speak to him politely. Is he deaf? Doesn't he understand what people say to him? Cholmuk asked. Are they good at just talking? Do they have swords on their belts for decoration? Make them stop talking and attack already. The man got angry and immediately pulled out his sword. Cholmuk looked at him in fury, then jumped up from his chair, grabbed him by the head and slammed him on the ground, and Nosak hit the other guy with his weapon. Watching them smash everything, the innkeeper clutched his head and cried out with tears in his eyes, saying that they said they wouldn't break anything, and he couldn't watch this. The other innkeepers were surprised that someone actually beat up those idiots, and the fight continued. Sometime later, at the Graceful Winds Trading Guild, MC wrote a letter and went outside. Kwano approached him and asked if he had called him. He apologized for adding to his worries when he was so busy, but he needed him to send this to the Tang family urgently. He replied that he would immediately order a carrier pigeon to be prepared, and was surprised to think that the young master had such impressive connections. Finally, Cholmuk and Nosak returned, and not alone, but with prisoners. Nosak ordered them to kneel and bow their heads, and Mujin praised them for their excellent work. The man asked who they were. Do they even understand who they're dealing with, and that such actions are unacceptable? MC told him that he knew exactly who they were. They were idiots from the Chonghua Merchant Guild, and they dared to point their swords at his people. He could consider this a declaration of war, right? The man looked at him with fear and began to deny everything and thought, is this Hua Mujin? When did he manage to show up here? And what is this atmosphere hanging around him? MC asked where their leader was. He needed to see him, and the man realized that he had outsmarted them. It was a trap. Mujin, puzzled, noted that judging by his look, he was not going to talk. He called out to Nosak, and he immediately knew what to do. He hit one of them in the face with his weapon, which caused him to immediately fall and start writhing in pain, and the man worriedly asked why he was doing all this. They didn't have any leader. MC didn't let him finish and ordered Nosak to split open the head of another warrior. As soon as he struck the other warrior, the man excitedly exclaimed that he would tell him everything, if only he would spare his life. Mujin said he should have done this from the start, then placed his hand on his head and threateningly asked who was leading them. He became very frightened and told them everything.